Chapter 439. Wielding his sword, Hang Qiuyu charged into the crowd. Everywhere he passed, blood flowed and limbs flew in all directions. It was a tragic scene that resembled hell. The battlefield was in chaos. Shouts, screams, cries of pain and the sounds of killing were mixed together. Ta, ta, ta. A series of heavy footsteps sounded from the south. With every sound, the ground would tremble faintly, as if there was a huge monster charging over with a terrifying momentum. Many cultivators turned towards the sound. A cultivator with a buzz cut strode over in large strides. His upper body was bare, and his exposed skin shone with a bronze glow. His muscles bulged, and he was filled with explosive strength. That person carried a gigantic iron spear on his shoulder. Black and heavy, he exuded a berserk aura and his gaze was fiery. With a domineering aura, he roared in laughter. A bunch of fools who don't know what's good for them. How dare you guys lay your hands on the human emperor's palace? Hurry, run. It's someone from the fiend sex. It's the fiend heir of Overlord Palace, Peng Yu. Run. Peng Yu slapped the spear on his shoulder and it bounced up as he shouted. It's too late to escape now. Swoosh. The iron spear tore through the air and turned into a dark streak of light, howling with the wind. Peng Yu followed the spear and charged into the crowd. The few cultivators at the front were smashed into pieces by the black spear. With a shake of the spear, the spirit weapons that struck it were all shattered. Kill! Peng Yu hollered and gripped the black iron spear with a single hand. With a backhand sweep, more than 10 cultivators in the crowd were smashed into pieces with a sweeping momentum. Overlord Palace was the strongest body-tempering sect among the fiend sections. Even in Tianhuang mainland, they could definitely be ranked in the top 3, and were on par with Glass Palace and Diamond Monastery. As the fiend heir of Overlord Palace, Peng Yu's melee combat strength was terrifying. This was a feast of slaughter. 8 spirit meridians shone on Peng Yu's body as spirit energy surged and his bloodline surged. Wherever the iron spear passed, people would be crushed and no one could withstand its sharpness. On the other side, purple chi came from the east. It was as though an emperor had descended with a wanton might. Run! It's Wuxia from the Purple Firmament sect. The crowd in the east was also in chaos. Many cultivators fled in all directions. A cultivator in a violet robe stood in midair with a solemn expression. His entire body was coiled with a myriad of strands of violet chi, a myriad of rays of light, and a myriad of strands of auspicious radiance. His entire body emanated a dignified aura of looking down upon all living beings. Go! Wuxia waved his sleeve and lightly reprimanded. The hundreds of millions of strands of purple chi that were originally surrounding his body slowly condensed into purple longswords in midair. They shone brightly, as if the purple clouds had pierced through the sky, tearing the crowd into pieces. The purple clouds swept across the sky, and many cultivators fell from the sky, perishing. Peng Yu was right. The appearance of the human emperor's palace would definitely lead to an unprecedented bloody battle in the primordial battlefield. The vicinity of the human emperor palace would become a shura filled with killing. It was not just the sword sect and purple firmament sect. The successors of the other 9 sects also appeared one after another and joined the battlefield. There were cold fairies in fluttering white robes, cultivators with lightning in their eyes and swift movements, Taoist priests wielding horsetail whisks and crowns, from the fiend sects. Apart from the fiend heir of Overlord Palace, Peng Yu Shangguanyu, the fiend heir of Illusion Fiend Cult, all of them had appeared. The fiend heir of Shura sect, Bai Yu, wielded his Shura saber and charged into the battlefield in a killing frenzy. The previous time around, Bai Yu was defeated by Su Zimo in the Saber Mountain Spirit Sea, and had to escape with blood escape. Now that he had appeared once more, he had already unlocked his 8th spirit meridian. To be fair, if one had not unlocked their 8th meridian, they would end up like the cultivators before them, dead just by coming to take a look, let alone get a share of the human emperor's palace. The successors of the immortal and fiend sects tacitly avoided each other for the time being and joined forces to kill the other cultivators. In such a situation, only 8 Meridian Foundation establishment cultivators had a sliver of hope of escaping. At the edge of the chaotic battlefield stood a burly man in linen robes. He had thick brows, large eyes and a rough face as he watched everything coldly. Su Zimo had already arrived. Ding ding, Right then a long chime sounded from the west, as though it could cleanse one's soul in an incomparably sacred manner. Accompanied by the chime, a bald cultivator walked over on foot. Dressed in monk robes, he wielded a golden bell and his eyes shone with a faint golden light. It was the successor of Diamond Monastery, Monk Ju-chan. Amitabha. Monk Ju-chan raised one hand and chanted a Buddhist proclamation with a strong voice. After 10 days, Monk Ju-chan's expression was normal and his aura was stable. It was clear that his injuries had already healed. Su Zimo nodded to himself. It was no wonder why Diamond Monastery was one of the 6 Buddhist monasteries. It was indeed capable. Previously, Monk Ju-chen's arm was ruptured and his organs were dislocated after being suppressed by Su Zimo. The fact that Monk Ju-chan was able to recover fully in 10 days also proved that his physique was truly extraordinary. Ding! Expressionless, Monk Ju-chan flicked his wrist gently and another chime sounded. The cultivators who were initially flying on their swords in midair and wanted to escape from the battlefield shuddered and turned pale, swaying unsteadily. Ding! The chime sounded once more. Thud! Thud! One after another, the cultivators fell from midair. By the time they hit the ground, their gazes were dim and they were bleeding from their 7 orifices. They were already dead. Behind Monk Ju-chan, there were 3 other monks and a nun walking over slowly. Although the 3 monks and nun were all from the Buddhist monasteries, they were dressed differently and the sect badges on their waists were different as well. 5 successors of the 6 Buddhist monasteries had already appeared. The paragons were all gathered. After this battle, the cultivators of the other sects and itinerant cultivators, who thought that they were strong, finally realized the terror of the successors of the Immortal, Fiend and Buddhist monasteries. Even though they were all at 8 Meridian Foundation establishment, they were not a match for the successors of the 3 sects. The number of cultivators around the human emperor's palace decreased, but the number of corpses increased and blood flowed like rivers. Finally, someone spotted Su Zimo, who was standing at the edge. It was the fiend heir of Shura sect, Bai Yu. Naturally, he did not recognize Su Zimo after his disguise. Otherwise, he wouldn't have walked over alone without any reservations. Bai Yu's expression was cold as he wielded the bloodied Shura saber in his hands. He looked at Su Zimo emotionlessly. Su Zimo was expressionless, but there was a hint of mockery in his eyes. Die! Bai Yu swung his Shura saber and drew a blood-colored arc in midair, slashing towards Su Zimo's head. Su Zimo's eyes lit up. Just as he was about to make a move, a shout sounded from behind him. Stop! A fragrance wafted over. A pink ribbon tore through the air. Although it looked soft and weak, it blocked the edge of the saber and withstood Bai Yu's attack. Immediately after, as though it had a mind of its own, the pink ribbon coiled upwards along the saber. Bai Yu frowned and retracted his Shura saber hurriedly. Demoness Ji, what are you doing? Bai Yu looked at the girl in pink who appeared behind the burly man and asked with an unfriendly expression. Demoness Ji had already put on her veil once more. Chuckling gently, she rolled her eyes at Su Zimo. This is a friend that I invited along with the fiend sections. Chapter 440. When he heard that, Su Zimo frowned. Just as he was about to retort, Demoness Ji suddenly tiptoed and whispered into his ear. With the descent of the human emperor's palace, everyone is vying for supremacy. The successors of the Immortal, Fiend and Buddhist sects have a tacit understanding and will choose to eliminate the other cultivators first. Since you're alone, you'll definitely be targeted. Why don't you follow the Fiend sects first? There's no harm in that. In reality, the reason why Su Zimo came this time round was partly because of the human emperor's palace. Secondly, he wanted to meet the paragons of the various major sects. He was not afraid of being targeted at all. However, with Demoness Ji by his ear, her actions were intimate and flirtatious. Coupled with her soft voice and youthful fragrance, Su Zimo felt his heart skip a beat, and for some reason, he did not reject her. Right after, Su Zimo snapped out of his stupor in shock and exclaimed internally. Demoness Ji's charm was omnipresent and impossible to guard against. As a Tao immortal of the Fiend sects, she did not even have to use any bewitching techniques on him. Her existence itself was a form of bewitchment. The higher the cultivation realm of the Fiend sect's Tao immortal, the more terrifying the power of bewitchment would be. In the end, a single frown, smile, or anger would cause one to be intoxicated and unable to extricate themselves. In the cultivation world, there were even some bewitching techniques that relied on half-concealed clothing, seductive gazes, words and bold actions to seduce men. Compared to the Tao Immortal Sutra, those bewitching techniques were completely inferior. At the end of the cultivation of the fiend sex Tao Immortal, one would definitely be a peerless beauty that could topple the world. Pure as ice and jade, they would be inviolable, and even the casual flirtatious expressions on their faces would be enough for ancient mighty figures to willingly follow them. Humph! Whitefeather sized up Su Zimo and sneered. He's merely a lover you found. What right does he have to be compared to us fiend heirs? He. Demoness G chuckled softly. What an arrogant tone. I wonder who that person was. Back in the depths of the underground, he was beaten up so badly by a random friend I found that he fled like a rat. When they heard that, Whitefeather's expression darkened and the other fiend heirs did not look too good either. This could be considered a humiliation for them, and no one was willing to mention it. Pang Yu swung his black iron spear and killed the last few cultivators. Suddenly, he turned around and strode over while dragging his spear. The tip of the spear naturally fell to the ground, sliding all the way, causing sparks to fly in all directions. Where is that scholar? Pang Yu arrived before Demoness Ji and asked loudly with a raging fighting spirit in his eyes. The scholar Pang Yu was referring to was naturally Su Zimo. She pouted and rolled her eyes. How would I know? Bai Yu suddenly said. He also came to the primordial battlefield. I've seen him before. Oh! When the fiend heirs heard this, their expressions changed as killing intent flashed across their eyes. After a pause, Bai Yu shook his head and said, however, I don't think he came here. I didn't see any traces of him. As for the battle between the two of them at the Saber Mountain Spirit Sea, Bai Yu was defeated and fled. He was utterly humiliated and would naturally not bring it up. Illusion fiend cult's heir harumphed coldly. That scholar is rather smart. If he dares to appear, this iron spear of mine will definitely stab a bloody hole in his body. Pang Yu had a proud expression as he slammed the iron spear in his hands onto the ground heavily. Instantly, a series of cracks appeared on the ground with a chilling killing intent that could not be ignored. Su Zimo's expression was calm and his eyes were unruffled. Pang Yu's gaze shifted and landed on Su Zimo. After sizing him up, he nodded with a smile. Not bad, you've got some guts. You're barely qualified to stand shoulder to shoulder with us fiend heirs. Shangguan Yu of Ecstasy Sect said leisurely. Shui Yang of Malevolent Earth Sect isn't here yet. This person will replace him first and can be considered as a helper. Shangguan Yu waved his folding fan gently. Just now, even though he had killed more than 100 cultivators, his clothes were not messy and he still looked elegant. Hey, what's your name? Pang Yu looked at Su Zimo and raised his head slightly. Su Zimo replied, Madblade. Madblade, haha. Pang Yu roared in laughter. You've got quite the tone. I wonder how your saber techniques are like. Bai Yu replied coldly. In the cultivation world, most people with such reputations tend to have mediocre capabilities. You can try, Su Zimo replied indifferently. You have a death wish. Bai Yu's expression changed as killing intent surged in his heart. Interesting. You're really arrogant. Pang Yu swept his iron spear horizontally and blocked Bai Yu's figure. With a grim expression, he shook his head. Let's not fight first. The situation isn't right. Everyone followed Pang Yu's gaze. The battlefield was more or less cleared and only the successors of the immortal, Buddhist and fiend sects were left within the range of the human emperor's palace. Among them, 7 of the 9 immortal sects had successors, including Sword sects Hang Chouyu and Purple Firmament sects Ao Yuxiao. Of the 6 Buddhist monasteries, 5 of them were present. Apart from monk Juchun of Diamond Monastery, there were also monks from Hollow Monastery, Formless Monastery and Wisdom Monastery. There was also a nun from Clear Heart Nunnery. Of the 7 fiend sects, the fiend heir of Malevolent Earth Sect, Shui Yang, was already dead and the thousand-faced assassin of Hidden Death Sect was nowhere to be seen. Apart from Su Zimo, the 4 fiend heirs and a fiend woman were present as well. These 20 cultivators could be considered as the top paragons of Tianhuang Mainland's Foundation establishment realm. Apart from Su Zimo, The other cultivators were all at 8 Meridian Foundation establishment. The reason why he felt that something was amiss was because the 7 paragons of the immortal sex, namely Sword Sex Hang Chouyu and Purple Firmament Sex Ao Yuxiao, were clearly joining forces with the 4 monks and 1 nun of the Buddhist monasteries to surround the fiend heirs. Hang Chouyu, Ao Yuxiao Ju Chan. What's the meaning of this? Peng Yu narrowed his eyes and asked slowly. Nothing. Hang Chouyu smirked and waved his slender fingers gently. We'll destroy your fiend sex first. The human emperor's palace's inheritance will naturally be chosen from the immortal and Buddhist sections. The few fiend heirs frowned. Including Su Zimo, there were only 6 of them on their side. However, there were a total of 12 paragons from the immortal and Buddhist sects. In other words, each of them would have to fight against at least 2 paragons. Peng Yu of Overlord Palace was publicly acknowledged as the strongest among the fiend heirs. However, he did not dare to claim victory against any one of Hang Chouyu, Ao Yuxiao or Monk Ju Chan, let alone 2 of them. Demoness Ji raised her voice. Now that the situation is clear with 3 sects and a total of 18 cultivators, we can definitely fight it out in pairs until the final victor obtains the human emperor's palace's inheritance. That's the only way to be fair. Monk Ju Chen's gaze swept past Su Zimo and paused for a moment before landing on Demoness Ji's face. He sneered. The situation will be clearer after we destroy your fiend sections. Fair. Ao Yuxiao shook his head. There's no such thing as fairness in front of the human emperor's palace. Furthermore, you're a fiend that everyone has the right to kill. Su Zimo, don't force yourself if you see that the situation isn't right. Hurry and leave this place. Right then Demoness Ji reached out and poked Su Zimo's waist gently as she whispered. End of chapter. Chapter 441. Have I been exposed? Although Su Zimo was expressionless on the surface, his heart skipped a beat. Don't deny it, it must be you. Demoness Ji leaned over and whispered, you can't hide from me. My instincts have always been accurate. I don't know what you're talking about. Su Zimo replied indifferently and shifted his gaze to the dozens of figures standing in the air outside the human emperor's palace. These dozen or so cultivators were all white-haired and senile. Although their eyes were turbid and they exuded an aura of old age, there was a shuddering aura coming from their bodies. Sealers. Demoness Ji said, don't worry, the sealers won't dare to attack given the circumstances. The immortal, Buddhist and fiend sects stand on equal footing and keep each other in check. As long as one of them makes a move and releases their golden core strength, the sealers of the other 2 sects will be implicated as well and both sides will definitely suffer losses. The 12 cultivators of the immortal and Buddhist sects walked over slowly and lined up in pairs. Gradually, they targeted the 6 people from the fiend sects, including Su Zimo. Sword Sex Hang Chouyu targeted Overlord Palace's Peng Yu right away. Purple Firmament Sex Ao Yuxiao targeted the Fiend Heir of Illusion Fiend Cult as well. It was a clash between the strong. The successor of the immortal sect, Snowdrift Valley, was a cold woman in fluttering white robes. She wielded a silver needle that was filled with a chilling aura and specialized in breaking through protection talismans and inner armor. The nun of Clear Heart Nunnery wielded a long sword that shone with a chilling sword beam. The 2 female cultivators of the immortal and Buddhist sects charged towards Demoness Ji right away. Seems like I'll have to take care of this nameless person. The successor of Heavenly Dipper Sex smiled gently and waved his sleeves. A flying sword that shone with 5 spirit lights tore through the air and pierced towards Su Zimo's head. Su Zimo swept his gaze and nodded to himself. It was no wonder why they were the top sects of Tianhuang mainland. They had a strong foundation and most of their paragons possessed a perfect spirit weapon. Su Zimo was unhurried as he brushed his storage bag and a saber appeared in his palm. Clang! The saber vibrated and shone with 4 spirit patterns. It was a supreme-grade spirit saber that was found in the Elixir Pool sect ruins. In order to conceal his identity, Su Zimo naturally could not bring out an iconic weapon like Blood Quencher. Otherwise, Demoness Ji, Bai Yu and the others would recognize him immediately. Although he could not use Blood Quencher, Su Zimo had no intention of hiding the 5 stances of the Sea Calming Manual. That was because in the cultivation world, other than him who knew the Sea Calming Manual, there was another successor who knew the 5 saber stances, whoosh. The flying sword tore through the air and burst out with 5 spiritual lights like a scorching sun. It was densely covered in qi and had an oppressive aura, arriving in an instant. Su Zimo's expression did not change. The spiritual energy in his body surged, and 7 spiritual veins appeared under his clothes. So it's just a piece of trash. Baiyu swept his gaze across and could not help but laugh coldly when he saw this. The other fiend heirs also looked disappointed. On the other hand, the paragons of the immortal and Buddhist sects looked relaxed. A 7 Meridian Foundation establishment cultivator was already considered as a rare genius in the cultivation world, and was even rarer in the Great Zhou dynasty. However, for the paragons present, a 7 Meridian Foundation establishment cultivator was equivalent to a piece of trash who would not last more than 10 breaths in a battle as such. Even though they were all 8 Meridian Foundation establishment cultivators, the combat strength of cultivators from other sects was far inferior to the successors of the major sects, let alone a 7 Meridian Foundation establishment cultivator. The fiend heirs were in a bad situation and were already frustrated to begin with. Now that they saw this, they frowned even more. Shangguan Yu of Ecstasy opened his folding fan and blocked the 2 incoming flying swords as he sneered, "Demoness G, your taste is truly getting worse." Among the paragons present, there were only 2 people who did not look down on him. One of them was Demoness G, and the other was Monk Ju Chan, who had suffered in the hands of Su Zimo. Clang! An ear-piercing sound of metal clashing echoed through the voids. Su Zimo swung the supreme-grade spirit saber in his hands and slashed against the incoming flying sword heavily. Sparks flew and the chi of the sword was shattered by a tremendous force, dissipating on the spot. Buzz! The sword quivered and swayed unsteadily, showing signs of falling. When the Sky Pride saw this scene from the corner of their eyes, their expressions changed. Something doesn't seem right. What a strong burst. That's a body-tempered cultivator, watch out. Swash. Su Zimo's figure had already vanished from the spot. In a few steps, he arrived before the successor of Heavenly Dipper sect. His eyes lit up in surging killing intent as he slashed with his saber. The saber tore through the voids at an extremely fast speed and ferocious power. In fact, there was even a hint of heat on the blade. So fast. The successor of Heavenly Dipper sect exclaimed internally as his hair stood on end and his pupils constricted. He was careless. A moment of carelessness had cost him the initiative and he was disadvantaged in the situation, falling into danger. Swoosh! The successor of Heavenly Dipper sect placed his palm on his storage bag and withdrew a dark golden shield. Injecting spirit energy, the shield expanded instantly and he raised it above his head. Clang! Another loud sound echoed when the saber struck the shield. Ugh! The light on the shield dimmed and the spirit light was almost shattered by Su Zimo's saber. The successor of Heavenly Dipper sect grunted dully and lowered his body, almost kneeling on the ground. Raising the shield with one hand, the successor of Heavenly Dipper sect clenched his other hand into a fist. Shrouded in astral chi, he punched towards Su Zimo's chest like a spear. After all, he was the successor of Heavenly Dipper sect of the 9 immortal sections. Even under such circumstances, he could still retaliate. Don't! Right then Monk Ju Chen's voice sounded. However, it was too late. When he saw the successor of Heavenly Dipper sect punch, a mocking look flashed through Su Zimo's eyes as he retaliated with a punch as well. Bang! The fists collided. Astral winds exploded and air currents rumbled. The successor of Heavenly Dipper sect was shocked and blood drained from his face as bean-sized sweat droplets flowed down instantly. Crack! Crack! The sound of bones cracking could be heard, causing one's teeth to ache. A few paragons could not help but turn over and their expressions changed. The successor of Heavenly Dipper sect's palm was already gone. It was smashed into meat paste and drooped on his wrist. His entire arm was bent beyond recognition and was limp. Even the stubble of his bones had pierced through his flesh and was exposed to the outside. There were streaks of blood on his white bones. It was a ghastly sight. Ah! The successor of Heavenly Dipper sect shrieked hysterically and fell to the ground, trembling in pain with a horrified expression. 2 slashes in one punch. The successor of Heavenly Dipper sect was crippled. It was not only the paragons present. Even the sealers who were watching were slightly moved. A lion will use its full strength even when hunting a rabbit. He underestimated his opponent and ended up in this state. He can't blame anyone else. Is it really because he underestimated his opponent? The situation on the battlefield was changing rapidly. Nobody expected that the successor of Heavenly Dipper sect would have an arm crippled the moment they exchanged blows and end up in a tragic state. This meant that a paragon had lost the right to fight for the human emperor's inheritance, and could only withdraw. Many paragons looked at the successor of Heavenly Dipper sect with sympathy and pity. Up until now, many paragons had yet to realize that a nightmare that had shrouded their hearts for years had just begun. Compared to some of them, the successor of Heavenly Dipper sect was considered lucky. Chapter 442. What's the background of this mad blade? He's got some capabilities. Pang Yu roared in laughter and swept his spear, forcing Hang Qiuyu to retreat before thrusting his spear forward. Compared to Malevolent Earth Sect's spear technique, Pang Yu's spear technique lacked many fancy changes. Although it was a simple straight thrust, it had a domineering aura and closed in step by step, releasing the ferocious intent of the spear completely. He was not disadvantaged despite fighting 1 against 2. Sword Sect's Hang Qiuyu's sword technique was not weak at all. His sword chi was sharp, both defensive and offensive, clashing repeatedly against Pang Yu's spear and creating a series of sparks. On the Fiend Sect's side, apart from Pang Yu, who was still undefeated despite fighting 1 against 2, the other Fiend heirs were all disadvantaged. Shangguan Yu and Demoness Zong were weaker in terms of direct combat strength and were in even more perilous situations. They were completely suppressed and forced to retreat. On the other side, even Illusion Fiend Cult's Fiend heir might not be able to win against Purple Firmament Sect's Ao Yuxiao in a one-on-one fight. Beside Ao Yuxiao, there was the successor of Clear Wind Temple helping him. Illusion Fiend Cult's Fiend heir was also in a dire situation. If this continued, the Fiend heirs would definitely lose. On the battlefield, the only variable was the mysterious burly man known as Frenzied Blade in everyone's eyes. Ding, with 2 slashes and a punch, Su Zimo crippled Heavenly Dipper sect's successor. Suddenly an ear-piercing chime sounded in his ears. The chime was long and incessant, piercing through one's head like a sharp thorn. Wielding the golden bell, Monk Juchan had already arrived behind Su Zimo. This was the Diamond Bell, a spirit weapon of the Buddhist monasteries. It was shaped like a bell and was made of purple gold copper. It had a round mouth with flat edges and was engraved with intricate patterns. The golden bell in Monk Juchen's hands was nourished by the Buddhist light of Diamond Monastery, and possessed an inexplicable might after listening to the chanting of sutras by the monks day and night. Those with evil natures and heretical sects would be affected the most when they heard the chime. Weaker cultivators would die on the spot and bleed from all orifices. When Monk Juchan appeared, his golden bell Zen sound alone was enough to kill dozens of 7 Meridian Foundation establishment cultivators. Its power was terrifying. Unfortunately, although Lingyin was strong, her influence on Su Zimo, who had opened 7 acupoints, was negligible. Whoosh! A gust of wind blew behind his head. Monk Juchan wielded his Vajra scepter and stabbed down viciously at Su Zimo's head with frightening strength. Clang! Su Zimo didn't even look at it. It was as if he had eyes at the back of his head. With a backhand slash, he heavily hacked at the Vajra pestle, causing a loud explosion and sparks to fly everywhere. One side was dealing with the enemy at the last minute, while the other side was accumulating strength for a strike. However, Su Zimo remained unmoved. Instead, Monk Juchan took half a step back. So strong. This person's physical body is comparable to the successor of the Diamond Temple? When the geniuses caught sight of this, their hearts skipped a beat. Initially, when Su Zimo crippled the successor of Heavenly Dipper sect, everyone thought that it was because the latter had underestimated his opponent and was caught off guard. But now, when they saw how Su Zimo was not disadvantaged after clashing head-on with Monk Juchan, the geniuses of the immortal and Buddhist sects frowned with grim expressions. What they did not know was that at that moment, Monk Juchan was even more alarmed. The Vajra scepter in his hands was also a perfect spirit weapon of the Buddhist monasteries, and was even stronger than the golden bell. The Vajra scepter was also known as the Treasure Scepter and Demon Subduing Scepter. It was a unique weapon of Diamond Temple, and symbolized invincibility. It was ferocious and domineering, capable of suppressing all evil. Initially, Monk Juchan thought that he could suppress Su Zimo firmly with the two spirit weapons of the Buddhist monasteries. However, even with the two spirit weapons, he could not gain the upper hand at all. Instead, he was at a slight disadvantage. Su Zimo turned around and smirked. "Monk, I spared your life the previous time. How dare you provoke me again?" Boom! Su Zimo stomped his feet and the ground quaked. With a boom he shot forward and arrived before Monk Juchan instantly. Channeling his bloodline, he swung his arm and slashed down with his saber, as though he wanted to tear the voids apart. The heart should be born without a place to reside. Monk Juchan chanted Buddhist sutras and his Vajra heart released the power of his bloodline. His body expanded by an inch and his aura surged. Roar! Monk Juchan roared furiously and a sound similar to a divine lion's roar echoed from the depths of his throat. It shook one's heart and two bedazzling golden beams of light burst forth from his eyes, as though a Vajra had descended in a ferocious manner. Monk Juchan's figure seemed to have vanished, and was replaced by a fearless lion with golden fur that reared its head and roared into the skies. Even Shangguan Yu and the others who were at the periphery of the battlefield felt their hearts skip a beat, let alone Su Zimo who was opposite. There were many cultivation techniques and secret skills of the Buddhist monasteries that could counter the fiend sections. However, it was a pity that Monk Juchan was facing Su Zimo. The foundation of Su Zimo's cultivation was the mystic classic of the 12 demon kings of the Great Wilderness. In fact, he had even devoured half a dragon. When the fearless lion met Su Zimo's demonic gaze, it could not help but feel a hint of fear and its aura weakened instantly. Clang! The spirit saber collided against the Vajra pestle, and the sound of metal clashing was ear-piercing. Monk Juchan retreated once more. Swash! Before Monk Juchan could catch his breath, the second slash had already descended. Su Zimo's aura was long and his stamina was frightening. Monk Juchan could not compare to him. The Diamond Sutra merely tempered one's body, but the mystic classic of the 12 demon kings of the Great Wilderness had completely cultivated Su Zimo into an existence that was even more frightening than pure-blooded ferocious beasts. Clang! Monk Juchan could only raise his Vajra pestle once more to defend against the second slash. His arms were numb and he had already lost all feeling as he retreated once more with a pale expression. When the successor of Hollow Monastery of the Buddhist monastery saw that, he broke free and charged towards Su Zimo, allowing the successor of Wisdom Monastery to fight against Shangguan Yu of the Blood Sect alone. Swoosh! Wielding a Chaos Essence steel rod, the successor of Hollow Monastery leaped into the air and smashed down viciously. The wind howled with a buzzing sound, as though he wanted to crush the mountains. Ah! Right then, a cry of pain sounded from another part of the battlefield. Finally, Demoness Ji could not hold on against the attacks of the two successors of Snowdrift Valley and Clear Heart Nunnery. A gash appeared on her arm and blood gushed out. She was already injured. Although the wound seemed small, it did not reach her bones. However, Snowdrift Valley's flying sword contained 1,000-year-old frost chi that could freeze one's bloodline spirit energy. At that moment, it was entering Demoness Ji's body through the wound and flowing through her limbs. Demoness Ji's movement technique turned increasingly sluggish, and there was even a layer of frost on her brows as her lips turned purplish. When he saw that, Su Zimo's eyes narrowed. At that moment, even Peng Yu of Overlord Palace could not fend for himself. Nobody could save Demoness Ji. Monk Juchan wielded his Vajra pestle, while the successor of Hollow Monastery wielded his Chaos Essence steel rod. The two eminent monks of the Buddhist monasteries joined forces and charged towards Su Zimo. Su Zimo's eyes lit up as he roared. Against the combined attacks of the two paragons of the Buddhist monasteries, Su Zimo did not dodge or retreat. Suddenly, a series of crackling sounds could be heard from his body as his tendons and bones rang together. Splash! Su Zimo struck with his saber. The sound of tides echoed. Countercurrent. See Calming Manual Countercurrent Stance. Chapter 443. A massive aura that could tear through 1,000 layers of waves burst forth from the saber in Su Zimo's hands in a crushing manner. Against the current, it was as though it could slice through and sever everything. That aura seemed like it wanted to tear through the voids and attracted countless gazes. That is, saber force. Some paragons were shocked and exclaimed. The sound of the tides was way too clear and its aura was shuddering. All the paragons present could tell that that slash had already reached the second level of the Saber Dao force. However, not all the paragons could recognize the origin of that slash. Only Hang Qiuyu of Sword Sect and Bai Yu of Shura Sect narrowed their eyes and said slowly, "See calming manual countercurrent." The moment those words were said, a huge wave was created on the battlefield. While everyone might not be able to recognize the origin of that saber technique, they had heard of the Sea Calming Manual for a long time. That was the ultimate skill of the first Saber Emperor that dominated the world and was invincible. Back in the ancient era, the first Saber Emperor had left Tianhuang mainland and traveled overseas. Right now, in the cultivation world, there was only a single successor of a place that knew of that saber technique. Divine Phoenix Island. He's the successor of Divine Phoenix Island. No wonder he doesn't dare to reveal his sect badge. The various top factions of the cultivation world were none other than the 9 immortal sects, 7 fiend sects, 6 Buddhist monasteries, 5 heretical doctrines, 4 unorthodox groups, 3 aristocratic families, 2 islands and 1 palace. Among them, the 2 islands were established overseas and rarely stepped foot into Tianhuang mainland. There was no news about them and they were the most mysterious. Divine Phoenix Island was one of the 2 islands. Due to the relationship between the Saber and Sword Emperors in the ancient era, the feud between the 2 super sects, Divine Phoenix Island and Sword Sect, had been going on for a long time. Each time a successor of Divine Phoenix Island stepped foot into Tianhuang mainland, it would cause a huge commotion in Tianhuang mainland and there would naturally be a bloodbath. It's the successor of Divine Phoenix Island? The last time a successor of Divine Phoenix Island appeared was 10,000 years ago. Far away, more than 10 sealers murmured softly and frowned slightly. Everyone had heard about the disappearance of the Saber Mountain Spirit Sea, and the news of some cultivators obtaining the inheritance of the Saber Emperor. However, it was impossible for them to cultivate to the state of force in such a short period of time. Only the successor of Divine Phoenix Island who cultivated the Saber Dao from a young age, and immersed himself in the Sea Calming Manual for many years could possibly reach this level. On the battlefield, almost all the proud elites of heaven believed that this linen-clothed big fellow came from Divine Phoenix Island. However, Bai Yu, the devil son of the Shura sect, had a gloomy expression on his face. His cold eyes lingered on Su Zimo for a long time before he withdrew them. He did not know if the successor of Divine Phoenix Island had entered the ancient battlefield. However, he witnessed with his own eyes that a cultivator had obtained the Saber Emperor's inheritance and cultivated countercurrent as well. The burly man in linen robes and the green-robed cultivator were vastly different in terms of appearance, figure and attire. Even their weapons were different. However, it wasn't as if there weren't any similarities between the 2. Both of them had strong physiques and cultivated countercurrent. Furthermore, based on the cultivation realm of the green-robed cultivator back then, the fact that he was at 7 Meridian Foundation establishment made perfect sense. More importantly, both the burly man in linen robes and the green-robed cultivator were related to Demoness Ji. Before Bai Yu's thoughts were finished, a change had already happened on the battlefield. When Su Zimo slashed out, Monk Ju Chan and the successor of Hollow Monastery who were on the opposite side felt the greatest pressure, and their expressions changed in shock. At that moment it was too late for both of them to stop. Clang! Clang! 2 deafening sounds could be heard almost at the same time. Before the descendant of Xiankong Temple could land on the ground, he was sent flying by a huge force and fell far away. The Chaos Essence steel rod in his hands was sent flying as the successor of Hollow Monastery spat out a mouthful of blood and fell into the mud. His face was frighteningly pale and his eyes were tightly shut. He had already fainted. He was severely injured with a single slash. Yet another paragon was disqualified. Monk Juchan gripped the diamond staff with both hands and channeled the spirit energy in his dantian to its limits with all his might. Widening his eyes, his blood chi surged and his entire body was covered in diamond as he chanted, "Indestructible diamond." Thud thud thud. Even so, Monk Juchan could not defend against the force and was forced to retreat continuously. With every step he took, a deep footprint would appear on the ground. After retreating 7 steps, Monk Juchan could not stabilize himself and fell to the ground on his butt, looking wretched with blood oozing from the corner of his lips. Compared to the successor of Hollow Monastery, He was only lightly injured and could still fight. After repelling 2 paragons with a single slash, Su Zimo did not stop at all. In a flash, he sprinted and arrived at another battlefield in the blink of an eye. At that moment Demoness Ji was already in danger. The moment she blocked the flying sword of Snowdrift Valley's successor, the sword of Clear Heart Nunnery's nun arrived as well. The angle of the attack was tricky. It came from below her waist and flicked upwards. Demoness Ji's eyes were frosty and her lips were purplish from the cold. Her movements were sluggish, and just as she was about to be unable to dodge the attack, a saber beam appeared on the battlefield. A figure appeared in front of her. It was familiar. Swash! Su Zimo entered the battlefield and swung his saber once more. Unlike Countercurrent, this slash was extremely gentle, as though it was rippling on the surface of a lake. Instantly, Clear Heart Nunnery's nun sword was swept in. Clang! 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 There was a series of collisions. With each collision, the face of Clear Heart Nunnery's nun turned paler. See calming manual ripple stance. The ripple stance was as smooth as water. Once it was released, it was relentless and relentless until the saber beam flashed once more. The sword of Clear Heart Nunnery's nun was repelled and her chest was exposed as the saber sliced. Poof! Blood flashed. Ah! The nun of Clear Heart Nunnery shrieked in pain and staggered in retreat. A bloody wound appeared on her chest and blood gushed out. Thankfully, she had crushed a protection talisman earlier on. Otherwise, that slash would have sliced her into 2. Yet another paragon left the scene dejectedly. Shoo! The sound of a sharp blade tearing through the air echoed with a chilling aura. With a backhand slash, Su Zimo slashed heavily against the incoming flying sword. Instantly, a layer of frost covered the blade of his saber. At the same time, Snowdrift Valley's successor's voice sounded. Ice Seal! A bone-chilling wind blew, as though a basin of ice water had descended from the skies and poured onto Su Zimo's body. Right in front of everyone, a thick layer of ice formed on Su Zimo's body at a speed visible to the naked eye, starting from his head and spreading to his entire body. In the blink of an eye, Su Zimo was motionless and maintained his stance from before. His expression froze as he turned into a lifelike ice sculpture. When they saw that, some paragons heaved a sigh of relief, as though a heavy burden had been lifted from their shoulders. The power released by Su Zimo was way too terrifying and unparalleled. 3 paragons had already died in his hands. None of the many sky prides present had absolute confidence in being able to suppress him. Fellow Taoist Ling Han is truly formidable. It's no wonder why he's Snowdrift Valley's successor. Impressive. He managed to seal the successor of Divine Phoenix Island with a single ice seal. A few paragons praised one after another. Demoness Ji's heart sank and her eyes were filled with endless worry. She shuddered and wanted to save Su Zimo before she could purge the frost chi in her body. It's too late. The successor of Snowdrift Valley, Ling Han, descended from the skies with a cold expression in her fluttering white robes and declared proudly, "This is a secret skill of Snowdrift Valley. Anyone who is struck by it will have their bloodline and spirit energy sealed in ice and die within 10 breaths." Is that so? Suddenly, a strange voice sounded from the battlefield. Chapter 444. Everyone could clearly hear that the sound came from within the ice sculpture. Crack! 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 Accompanied by cracking sounds, cracks appeared on the ice sculpture one after another, growing densely and covering its entire body. Snowdrift Valley's Ling Han's expression changed as disbelief filled her eyes. Boom! There was a deafening sound. Right in front of everyone, the ice sculpture exploded, revealing a tall and mighty figure. The sound of a tsunami rumbling could be heard from within that person's body, causing one's heart to shudder. Tsunami blood! Someone exclaimed softly. This sudden turn of events caused many of the geniuses who were fighting to stop temporarily and look over. Shurasek's Bayu's gaze flickered and his expression was dark. There was another similarity between the burly man in linen robes and the green-robed cultivator in the Saber Mountain Spirit Sea. Both of them had cultivated to the tsunami blood realm. Of course, that was a ridiculous guess, and it was more of Bayu's intuition than anything else. While a cultivator might be able to make use of exquisite disguise techniques or some sort of mask-type spirit weapon to change their appearance, there was no way they could change their physique that much. That was something that could not be explained no matter what. When he sensed Bai Yu's gaze, Su Zimo was expressionless, but killing intent rose in his heart. Within Su Zimo's body, boiling blood surged and surged through his limbs and organs, purging away the frost chi within his body instantly. The frost between his brows was gone and a mist coiled above his head. Within it, Su Zimo was like a supreme immortal king that could not be looked at. Ha 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 ha. Glancing sideways at Snowdrift Valley's successor who was not far away, Su Zimo could not help but burst into laughter. What dogsh asterisk ti seal? That's all there is to it. Ling Han's face was pale and she was so angry that her arms were trembling and her brows were furrowed. Since when had Snowdrift Valley's secret skill been looked down upon as such? In other words, if the successor of Divine Phoenix Island had not cultivated to the Tsunami Blood Realm, there was no way he could break free from the power of Ice Seal. Su Zimo took a few steps back and glanced at Demoness Ji, who was shivering from the cold. Frowning slightly, he reached out and gripped her palm, channeling the spirit energy within his body and surging it furiously. Although Su Zimo's cultivation was one level lower than most of the heavenly talents present, his spiritual energy was purer and denser, with a trace of scorching heat. A warm energy surged through her body, gradually purging the cold poison from her body. Perhaps it was because she had recovered some blood chi or for some other reason, Demoness Ji's pale cheeks flushed red. She lowered her head shyly, causing one's heart to skip a beat. Seeing this scene, many of the paragons present had different expressions. Anyone could see that this descendant of Divine Phoenix Island had an unusual attitude towards the demonic sections. It didn't seem like he had been charmed by her. But to say that the two of them had an ordinary relationship was even more impossible. This descendant of Divine Phoenix Island was clearly worried about the demonic sect's grand opening, fearing that she would be harmed. Humph! Shangguan Yu of the demonic sect flicked his wrist and opened his folding fan, saying in a sour tone, Demoness Ji, you've got some skills. You've even hooked up with the descendant of Divine Phoenix Island. She pretended not to see the strange gazes of others. Pursing her red lips, she glared at Su Zimo unblinkingly with her beautiful eyes. As though she was shrouded in a layer of mist, she said softly, "You're still not admitting it?" Her voice was so soft that only the two of them could hear it. Su Zimo pulled her behind him and whispered, "Heal up first." Demoness Ji smiled. A warm current flowed through her heart. Su Zimo's words were equivalent to a silent acknowledgement of her guess. Earlier on, she had already guessed it when this person attacked domineeringly and repelled Monk Ju Chun, exposing his back to her. However, she did not dare to confirm it at that time. It was only just now when this person appeared once more and blocked all the damage for her that she was truly certain that this person was Su Zimo. Demoness Ji knew in her heart that everything that Su Zimo did was for her sister, Yaoxue. However, she did not care. At the very least, there was someone in this world who would trust and protect her unconditionally, even if she had to go against all the paragons, even if she was an empress of the fiend sections, successor of Divine Phoenix Island. Sword Sex Hang Chuyu narrowed his eyes and the sharpness on his body turned sharper, resembling an unsheathed sword. He said slowly, "Good, very good. Since you dared to enter the ancient battlefield, don't think about returning alive." Divine Phoenix Island and Sword Sect had a long feud. Each time a successor of Divine Phoenix Island stepped foot into Tianhuang mainland, they would definitely fight against the successor of Sword Sect. This is a feud between us. There's no need for fellow Taoists of the fiend sects to get involved. Hang Chuyu cupped his fists towards Pang Yu and the others and said in a deep voice, "Heh." Pang Yu retracted his black iron spear and rested it on his shoulder, smiling. Well said, well said. The fiend sects chose to sit by the sidelines and reap the benefits. It was a win-win situation and was exactly what the fiend heirs wanted. Be careful. Hang Chuyu's sword is extremely fast. There's a high chance that he still has some tricks up his sleeves after the battle, Demoness Ji reminded Su Zimo softly. Su Zimo smiled nonchalantly. Wielding his saber, he did not waste time with Hang Chuyu and strode over saying, "Successor of Sword Sect? That's great. I'll chop off your head and use it as a sacrifice for my saber." Su Zimo was dressed in coarse hemp robes with his chest exposed. The way he said such vulgar words made him seem even more unrestrained and unrestrained. Even Bai Yu thought to herself that the aura of this person was way too different from the green-robed scholar. Swoosh! When he arrived, Su Zimo's eyes lit up. The moment he attacked, he slashed out with countercurrent and his saber beam expanded, enveloping Hang Chuyu's figure. Foo-foo! Hang Chuyu sneered and brushed his finger across his sword gently, flicking it gently. Buzz! The sword quivered and let out a clear sword hum. All of a sudden, Hang Chuyu attacked, and with a flick of his wrist, the sword vanished. What greeted him was a ball of cold light that suddenly bloomed. Dense sword light appeared in the void and shot out in all directions like raindrops. The sound of rain could be heard. It was dense and violent. Sword force. The eyes of many paragons lit up. That Sword Sex Sword Dao Secret Manual, Sword Overflow Rain. Indeed, Hang Chuyu held back. Peng Yu nodded to himself but was not surprised. On one side was countercurrent and on the other was sword overflow rain. Cling! Clang! After a series of collisions, the saber and sword forces dissipated and the two of them reappeared. The two of them were evenly matched in a stalemate. Although the countercurrent momentum was extremely ferocious, the raindrops from the overflowing rain sword technique continuously struck the saber, gradually dissipating the force that erupted from the saber. There was not much power left in that slash. Su Zimo had a feeling the entire time. Although he had cultivated the countercurrent style to the force realm, there seemed to be something missing from it. Notwithstanding the fact that Su Zimo could not release the final stance of the Sea Calming Manual, Sea Calming, he felt a sense of regret when he practiced the first 4 stances of the saber technique. There was also a hint of sluggishness in the connection of the 4 stances, and they were not smooth enough. If he could make up for that slight flaw, Hang Choyu's sword overflow rain alone would not be able to defend against countercurrent. End of chapter. Chapter 445. Many paragons frowned secretly. Although it seemed like they were evenly matched after the clash of sabers and swords, in reality, Hang Choyu was the one who lost. The startling sword in Hang Choyu's hands was a perfect spirit weapon. Furthermore, Hang Chuyu was at 8 Meridian Foundation establishment to begin with, while the successor of Divine Phoenix Island was only at 7 Meridian Foundation establishment. Who was superior and who was inferior could be seen at a glance. How dare you step foot in Tianhuang mainland and stir up a storm with that bit of capabilities? Hang Chuyu sneered and looked at Su Zimo with a provocative gaze. His sword swayed in his hands and a faint ripple of light appeared in the void. That's all I've got? It's enough to suppress you. Su Zimo roared in laughter and his bloodline rumbled. Taking a single step forward, he arrived before Hang Chuyu instantly and slashed with his saber. There was nothing fancy about it and it was simple. That single slash tore through the void, and coupled with the terrifying power of bloodline, the saber beam expanded with a frightening aura. Hang Chuyu channeled his bloodline as well, and his 8 Meridian spirit energy burst forth. Like an unsheathed sword, he fused with the startling sword in his hands and became one. Kill! Hang Chuyu did not dodge or retreat. He wanted to rely on the suppression of his cultivation realm to take on Su Zimo head-on. In the cultivation world, sword cultivators were generally acknowledged to be the cultivators with the strongest offensive power. The saber and sword collided in midair. Sparks flew as the sword chi and saber beam devoured one another. Between the two of them, the spirit chi went berserk and was sliced into pieces by the sword chi and saber beam. Hang Choyu's sword was extremely sharp. However, Su Zimo's saber was unyielding and majestic. Clang! 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 The saber and sword collided repeatedly in midair. The saber light was cold and the sword shadows were everywhere, dazzling everyone's eyes. This was completely a contest of strength without much skill. Su Zimo's eyes shone brighter and he fought with greater courage as he reared his head in laughter. Good. To be able to take 10 strikes from me, you have some ability. Come again. Su Zimo didn't seem to be tired at all. After such a fierce clash, his strength didn't decrease but instead increased. Ta! 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 Every time Su Zimo took a step forward, the ground would tremble. His aura would also rise, and his saber momentum would become heavier. Every slash of the saber was like 1,000 layers of giant waves that covered the sky and the sun. Hang Choyu had already put away his initial provocation, and his expression was solemn. Under such an impact, he already felt his arm go numb and he felt dizzy. This was a sign of exhaustion. This person's stamina is like a bottomless pit. Why is there no limit? Hang Qiuyu was secretly shocked. If he continued to fight like this, he would show signs of defeat within 10 strikes. I have to change my move. At that thought, a wisp of determination flashed through Hang Qiuyu's eyes. With a flick of his wrist, his sword trembled and exploded with a ball of sword light in midair. Specks of cold light surged over, shimmering with a bedazzling brilliance. This was a move from the sword rain art. The sword light was used to stimulate the opponent's eyes, causing them to be momentarily blinded and reveal a fatal flaw. Unfortunately, a demonic glint flashed through Su Zimo's eyes. His eyes shone brightly like two resplendent stars in the night sky, bright and deep, unaffected. Slashing out, he tore through the layers of cold light and collided against the startling sword. Clang! Hang Qiuyu shuddered and the startling sword nearly slipped out of his hands. When he saw that, Monk Ju-chun, who was watching at the side, frowned slightly and said darkly, Mad Blade's vision and hearing are extremely strong and his mental state is as stable as a rock. My Buddhist secret skills, Enraged Diamond Gaze and Lion Roar, can't affect him at all. Many paragons felt their hearts skip a beat. Everyone thought to themselves, if they were in his shoes, they wouldn't be able to withstand the Enraged Diamond Gaze and Lion Roar. Yet, the successor of Divine Phoenix Island was unaffected? Something's not right. Wuxia of Purple Firmament Sect had a stern expression. He was sharp and had already seen the situation clearly. Suddenly he said, Hang Qiuyu is going to lose. On the battlefield. Hang Qiuyu's expression was grim as he retreated continuously without any strength to retaliate. On the contrary, Su Zimo's saber beam intensified and closed in on Hang Qiuyu, shrouding him within. If the battle continued like this, the victor would be decided in less than 10 moves. Shoo! Suddenly a shuddering sound tore through the air. Purple chi from the east. 7 streaks of purple chi tore through the air and collided in the void, forming a gigantic purple sword with a wanton might that arrived instantly. Wuxia of Purple Firmament Sect had struck. After all, Divine Phoenix Island was an isolated overseas and rarely stepped foot into Tianhuang mainland. Their influence in the cultivation world was far inferior to Sword sects. Furthermore, Sword sect was one of the 9 immortal sects and there were many sects that were on good terms with them. Purple Firmament Sect was one of them. The purple sword flew towards him with a shocking might, as though an emperor had arrived personally with a domineering sword chi. Su Zimo had no choice but to stop in his tracks. If he continued chasing after Hang Qiuyu, he would definitely be pierced by the purple sword. Even if he didn't die, he would be severely injured. Su Zimo's expression was indifferent, as though he had expected this. Su Zimo retracted his saber and spun it, using vortex from the sea calming manual. A twisting force burst forth from his saber and slashed against the purple sword heavily. The purple sword swayed and was almost sent flying. Su Zimo's figure swayed and he landed on the ground with a nimble movement technique. Hang Qiuyu finally had a chance to catch his breath and break free. His entire body was drenched in sweat as he panted slightly. Standing side by side with Wuxia, they formed a triangle and faced off against Su Zimo. This is a fight between Divine Phoenix Island and Sword Sect. As one of the immortal sects, Purple Firmament Sect doesn't even care about the morals of the pugilistic world and wants to bully with numbers? Initially, Demoness Ji was recuperating at the side. When she saw this, she could not help but frown and question loudly. This is a fight for the human emperor's palace. Where are the morals of the pugilistic world coming from? Wuxia was expressionless as he recalled the purple sword in midair and said indifferently, if the successor of Divine Phoenix Island dares to step foot in Tianhuang mainland, he should be prepared to accept the challenges of the successors of the various major sects. Cut the crap. If you want to fight, I'll include you. Su Zimo roared in laughter. Wielding his saber, he strode forward and his saber beam expanded, enveloping both Wuxia and Hang Qiuyu. To think that he would dare to make the first move in a 1 versus 2 situation. Many paragons felt their hearts skip a beat. What guts? Peng Yu of Overlord Palace said slowly with a flickering gaze. He has guts, but it's unknown if he can survive. Guan Yu of Zhongshanguan sneered. Shurasek's Baiyu had a dark expression as he glared at Su Zimo the entire time. No one knew what he was thinking. On the battlefield, the sound of tsunamis within Su Zimo's body grew louder and rumbled like thunder. The power of his bloodline was shocking and his aura was long. After more than 10 rounds, Su Zimo was still able to gain the upper hand in a 1 versus 2 situation, suppressing Hang Qiuyu and Ao Yuxiao completely. Both of their expressions turned extremely terrible. Fellow Taoists, don't panic. I'm here. Monk Juchan, who was initially watching from the side, saw that the situation was not right. Wielding his golden bell in his left hand and his diamond staff in his right, he roared and joined the battlefield domineeringly. They could be considered as the 3 strongest paragons beneath the immortal and Buddhist sects. End of chapter. Chapter 446. 3 paragons of the immortal and Buddhist sects ganging up on a single person. If news of this were to spread to the cultivation world, it would definitely cause an uproar. Su Zimo took a deep breath of air and his chest puffed up. With a long roar, his bloodline surged as he slashed out 3 times in a row without any distinction between front and back. Every single slash brought forth a shuddering energy fluctuation. Bang! 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 Hang Qiuyu retreated when his saber struck the startling sword. When the saber struck the purple longsword, the purple qi around Ao Yuxiao's body was affected. It was shaken violently, and much of it was dispersed. The final slash struck the diamond staff. Monk Juchan grunted dully and staggered in retreat as his expression changed starkly. Su Zimo was fearless against the combined attacks of 3 paragons. Instead, he burst forth with an even more terrifying power with a torrential aura, as though he could suppress everything. Hang Qiuyu and the other 2 were not the only ones. Even the paragons watching were shocked. How did Divine Phoenix Island produce someone as such? If he possessed such immense strength at 7 Meridian Foundation Establishment, who would be able to suppress him if he was at 8 Meridian Foundation Establishment? It was no wonder why Divine Phoenix Island dared to allow this person to enter the ancient battlefield. A successor as such had already revealed his invincibility, and if nothing went wrong, there was a high chance that he would become an emperor in the future. Before the paragons could finish their thoughts, Su Zimo's next sentence caused a tsunami in their hearts. Su Zimo forced the 3 paragons back with 3 slashes with a torrential aura. His gaze was like lightning as he scanned the faces of the paragons one by one. Those who came to the human emperor's palace were all geniuses and elites of various major sects and were all prideful. Even though Su Zimo was strong and his methods were ferocious, none of them were willing to admit defeat before they fought him. Many paragons were eager to give it a try. Good. Su Zimo nodded and his bloodline surged as his tendons and bones rang together. He shouted, "That saves me the trouble. Come at me together. I'll take all of you." One after another, Su Zimo's voice was as loud as a bell, reverberating through the world and reverberating in everyone's ears for a long time. The moment he said that, the crowd was in an uproar. What did that mean? He wanted to take on all the paragons of the immortal and Buddhist sects single-handedly. Such heroism and boldness were rarely seen since ancient times. They were comparable to the human emperor. Pang Yu of Overlord Palace said slowly, as expected of Mad Blade. He's truly arrogant. At this moment, Pang Yu had no choice but to lower his head. Not to mention the outcome of this battle, he didn't dare to say this sentence out loud. He was not the only one. Many paragons present, including Hang Qiuyu and Ao Yuxiao, did not dare to say that. This was simply condescending and looking down on immortals and Buddhas. Do you really think you're one of the ancient emperors? Shang Guanyu sneered, "Don't forget, you're just a foundation establishment cultivator. I don't believe that this Mad Blade can suppress all the heavenly prides of the immortal and Buddhist sects by himself." Not bad. The Fiend Heir of Illusion Fiend Cult nodded as well. Hang Qiuyu and the others definitely have trump cards that they haven't used yet. If they fight to the end and cause all the paragons to attack with all their might, that person will definitely die. On the battlefield, Snowdrift Valley's Ling Han was the first to stand out with a cold expression. Just now that you're looking down on Snowdrift Valley's secret skill, I'll take you on. Since that's the case, I, Chan Yitzi of Chaos Essence Sect, Would like to have a taste of Divine Phoenix Island's ultimate skills as well. Another paragon stood out and stood side by side with Hang Choyu and the others. Immediately after, another paragon leaped onto the battlefield and said in a deep voice, "I'm from Zephyr Thunder Palace, say no more." Su Zimo waved his hand impatiently and interrupted indifferently, "If you want to fight, fight. I'm not interested in knowing." You, Zephyr Thunder Palace's successor, was speechless and grit his teeth with a dark expression. In the blink of an eye, Snowdrift Valley's Ling Han, Chaos Essence Sect's Chan Yitzi, Zephyr Thunder Palace's successor, Clear Wind Temple's successor, Formless Monastery's successor and Wisdom Monastery's successor arrived on the battlefield. The 9 paragons had hostile expressions and moved slowly, surrounding Su Zimo in the middle. When she saw that, Demoness Ji was anxious and looked at the few fiend heirs beside her. Frowning, she asked, "You guys are still choosing to stand by and do nothing? Now that Mad Blade is defeated, the successors of the immortal and Buddhist monasteries are going to turn against us. Our fiend sects are still at a disadvantage." He asked for it. Shangguan Yu of Bewitching Sect laughed strangely. Furthermore, this fellow Taoist from Divine Phoenix Island might truly be able to suppress the 9 paragons and become famous in a single battle. Peng Yu and the others had calm expressions, clearly having no intention of interfering. There was no way they would attack rashly before the situation was clear. Suddenly, Shura Sect's Bai Yu spoke with a dark gaze and said meaningfully, "If I were to attack, it's hard to say which side I'd be on." The battle had already erupted and Demoness Ji was not in the mood to ponder over Bai Yu's words. "Since it's so lively, count me in." Demoness Ji pretended to be relaxed and chuckled softly, choosing to join the battlefield. Given her strength, she could only hold back a single paragon at most. That way, she could at least share some of the pressure on Su Zimo. Su Zimo himself still had to face 8 paragons. Snowdrift Valley's Ling Han frowned and broke free from the battlefield to block Demoness Ji. The 2 peerless beauties fought in a graceful manner. Although this was the first time the 8 paragons were working together, they had a tacit understanding. Sword Sect's Hang Choyu and Diamond Monastery's monk Ju Chan joined forces to fight Su Zimo in melee combat. The other 6 parted ways with Su Zimo and made use of their spirit weapons and arts to release a torrential barrage of attacks. Spirit light filled the skies and sword chi streaked everywhere. Bang! Bang! Su Zimo slashed twice in succession, striking the startling sword and diamond scepter heavily. Hang Choyu and monk Ju Chun shuddered and retreated half a step. However, Su Zimo made use of the rebounding force to stomp on the ground and fly backward. His body was almost stuck to the ground as he dodged the many spirit weapons and arts by the skin of his teeth. When Ao Yuxiao saw Su Zimo charging towards him, his expression was unchanged as he rode on his sword and retreated swiftly to distance himself. Chaos Essence Sect's Chun Yizi's gaze flickered as he said in a deep voice, "This man has cultivated to the tsunami blood realm and has a terrifying physique. His melee combat strength is extremely strong as well. Everyone, there's no need to fight him head-on. As long as you distance yourself, you'll definitely be able to exhaust him to death." The paragons present were long prepared. Coupled with the fact that there were 8 of them, they supported one another and naturally wouldn't give Su Zimo a chance to close in. The moment Su Zimo charged towards one of them, the other 7 would definitely attack and block his path. Hang Choyu and monk Ju Chun were like maggots that chased after Su Zimo and got entangled in a fight. The spirit chi on the battlefield was already boiling. The 8 paragons worked together and intersected with one another, changing their positions repeatedly to restrict Su Zimo to the spot. Even so, the 8 of them could not break through Su Zimo's defense despite releasing wave after wave of attacks. All of them were blocked by the saber in his hands. As time passed by, the 8 paragons were increasingly alarmed and the killing intent in their hearts intensified. Against such an attack, the 8 of them knew that any one of them would not be able to last more than 10 breaths if they were in Su Zimo's shoes. Even if they could defend against all the attacks, the expenditure was way too great. Even perfected being Jindan might not be able to last this long. However, 15 minutes had already passed by now. Not only was the successor of Divine Phoenix Island not fatigued in the slightest bit, the battle intent in his eyes intensified and his eyes shone brighter. His aura was rising continuously as well. If this continued, the outcome would be unpredictable. End of Chapter 1. Chapter 447. This was a shocking battle. Spirit light filled the skies on the battlefield as sword chi and saber beams streaked everywhere. Spirit energy rumbled and every single collision caused a boundless brilliance to burst forth, shaking the 9 heavens. There were still some courageous cultivators who did not leave and hid far away, watching the battle below the human emperor's palace. Because they were too far away, they could not even make out the appearances of the paragons on the battlefield. However, they could see clearly that there was a tall and mighty figure streaking through the battlefield in an invincible manner. Even though he was surrounded, his entire body seemed to be shrouded in a layer of sacred golden light that shone resplendently. Amidst the raging waves, Monk Ju-chan was like a Buddhist Vajra. His eyes were tightly shut as he remained motionless despite the raging waves. It was not only Hang Choyu and the other two. The other 5 paragons released their final trump cards one after another as well. Some of them summoned perfect-grade defensive spirit weapons, some crushed a protection talisman with resplendent runes, while some released secret skills of their sex. All of them displayed their divine abilities. At the same time, Baiyu of Shura sect flashed and wielded a spirit saber. Blood chi surged from his body as he charged towards Su Zimo from behind. Baiyu! When Demoness Ji caught sight of that, she exclaimed and wanted to stop Baiyu. However, Snowdrift Valley's Ling Han's flying sword was even sharper and restrained Demoness Ji on the spot, unable to break out of the seal. The situation on the battlefield changed rapidly. Su Zimo's aura surged and he was about to defeat the 8 paragons with his raging waves. Unexpectedly, the 8 of them released their trump cards one after another and withstood the raging waves head-on. Furthermore, Hang Choyu and Ao Wuxia retaliated by summoning their Khanate spirit weapons as well. Amidst the saber beams and sword shadows, a faint figure appeared without warning. Like a phantom, it crept towards Su Zimo silently. A killing intent appeared. End of Chapter 1. Chapter 448. Baiyu of Shura sect? When he caught sight of Baiyu who was charging over from behind, Su Zimo understood that his identity had already aroused the other party's suspicions. At that thought, Su Zimo was filled with killing intent as well. All of a sudden, an unprecedented sense of danger surged into his mind. Su Zimo's hair stood on end and his scalp prickled. That sense of danger did not come from Hang Choyu, Ao Wuxia or any of the 8 paragons. It was not from Baiyu of Shura sect who was charging over from behind as well. It was from someone else. Su Zimo could not see that person at all. However, his sharp spirit perception developed from cultivating the mystic classic of the 12 demon kings of the great wilderness told him that an extremely frightening cultivator was hiding in a corner to deal a fatal blow to him. The angle of the intruder's attack was perfect. It was in Su Zimo's blind spot. The timing of his attack was also impeccable, without the slightest bit of error. At that moment, Su Zimo had just released raging tides and was at his weakest state before he could recover his strength. Furthermore, the 8 paragons had released their trump cards one after another. Hang Choyu and Ao Wuxia retaliated with a strong burst and even summoned their Khanate spirit weapons. Coupled with Baiyu who was charging over from behind, Su Zimo was already attacked from both sides. Under such circumstances, the attack of this unknown cultivator was a sure death situation for Su Zimo. Even an immortal would not be able to save him. Suddenly, a figure flashed through Su Zimo's mind, but his appearance was blurry. It was not that he had a bad memory. Nobody had seen the true appearance of that person before. It was the fiend heir of Hidden Death Sect, the thousand-faced assassin. Prior to this assassin of the fiend sects had not appeared. Now that he had attacked, he wanted to take Su Zimo's life. It's him. A few sealers near the human emperor's palace narrowed their gazes and exclaimed. One of them shook his head. It's over. That lad is already a corpse. Everyone nodded to themselves. In their opinion, with Su Zimo's methods, it was impossible for him to reverse this situation. It's a pity that such a genius died in front of the human sovereign palace. There's nothing to feel pity about. Since the history of time, countless heaven's favorites have died. This person is merely one of them. On the battlefield, the situation suddenly changed. The 8 paragons each displayed their mystical abilities. 6 of them withstood the raging tides forcefully while Hang Choyu and Ao Wuxia retaliated forcefully. A streak of purple light broke through the waves and slashed toward Su Zimo's face. Su Zimo's expression remained the same. He spun his saber and slashed forward. He wanted to use the power of his bloodline to take on the Purple Firmament sect's secret skill head-on. Buzz buzz buzz. At this moment, a flickering silver circle broke through the air and arrived first, buzzing and trembling. The 6 streaks of spiritual light were dazzling to the eye like a scorching sun, exuding a terrifying aura. Clang! The silver hoop smashed heavily on the long saber. Su Zimo shuddered. With a cracking sound, cracks appeared on the long saber and it exploded with a loud bang. It was crippled. A supreme-grade spirit weapon was crippled just like that. To think that the power of a Khanate spirit weapon would be this terrifying. The silver hoop spun in midair and smashed towards Su Zimo once more. At the same time, Ao Yuxiao's purple firmament slash descended. Baiyu arrived behind Su Zimo and slashed out with his Shura saber at an extremely strange angle, emitting a nauseating stench of blood along with the faint wails of ghosts. Saber Force. Even after being defeated by Su Zimo previously, Baiyu had a breakthrough and comprehended a saber force of the Shura saber. The 3 killing moves descended at the same time. At the same time, an indiscernible figure appeared wielding a long thin sword that was as thin as a cicada's wing. That person had an ordinary appearance and a blank gaze, resembling a dead fish. His killing intent was completely retracted, and the sword in his hand pierced towards the back of Su Zimo's head in an instant. The shattering of the spirit saber made matters worse. Su Zimo was empty-handed and had nowhere to retreat. When they saw that, Snowdrift Valley's Ling Han and Demoness Ji stopped instinctively. Ah! The blood drained from Demoness Ji's face as she exclaimed. Her mind went blank and she felt as though someone had gripped her heart and it had stopped beating. All of a sudden, fight! A loud roar exploded like spring thunder, piercing through metal and rocks and shaking one's mind. In reality, that was the thunderclap kill that Su Zimo had cultivated. However, in order to hide his identity, he changed the word kill to the word fight without any decrease in power. Even the cultivators who were watching the battle from afar were so frightened that their bodies trembled, and their eyes were filled with shock. They could not imagine how terrifying the impact would be for the 4 paragons surrounding Su Zimo, in the center of the battlefield. The 4 of them frowned at the same time with pained expressions. Be it the purple firmament slash, Hang Chuyu's Khanate spirit weapon, Baiyu's Shura saber and the thousand-faced assassin's thin sword. All of them froze for a moment. That momentary pause was Su Zimo's lifeline. Crackle! Su Zimo leaped into the air and his tendons and bones rang at the same time as he shrunk into a ball rapidly. Initially, he was a burly man that was 2 meters tall. Now, right in front of everyone, he was reduced to a ball of flesh the size of a baby. If this was used on ancient mighty figures or patriarchs, it would only be considered as ordinary. However, it was executed by a Foundation establishment cultivator, and could be considered as heavenly. That move, coupled with the explosion of Thunderclap Kill, caused the attacks of the 4 paragons to miss. Not only that, Hang Chuyu's Khanate spirit weapon even smashed towards Baiyu. Ao Yuxiao's purple firmament slash landed in front of the thousand-faced assassin. Clang! Baiyu shuddered and blood oozed from the corner of his mouth. The power of a Khanate spirit weapon was not something that everyone could withstand. The thousand-faced assassin retracted his sword in time. After blocking the purple firmament slash, he made a prompt decision and retreated swiftly with the force of the collision. If his attack missed, he would flee thousands of miles away. Swoosh! Suddenly, a shuddering aura burst forth from Su Zimo's body. It was as though a seal had been undone and a terrifying fiend god, an ancient demon, was released. Roar! Roar! Screech! A series of strange howls could be heard from Su Zimo's body. There were dragon roars, tiger roars, horse neighs, phoenix cries. Suddenly scarlet demonic chi burst forth and blanketed the skies. The round ball of flesh the size of a baby vanished and was replaced by a tall and burly figure, faintly discernible in the rich demonic chi. His eyes were pitch black and shone with a frightening glint. It was cold, sinister, and contained endless killing intent. Pust! The paragons, the sealers, and the cultivators watching from afar gasped in shock. Hang Choyu and the other 3 shuddered. At that moment, They even had the illusion that the person shrouded in demonic chi before them could devour them alive. You guys want to kill me with just your capabilities? Amidst the endless scarlet demonic chi, Su Zimo's voice sounded. It was as though it came from the primordial era where there were thousands of races in blood chi, sending chills down one's spine. After releasing his blood chi, Su Zimo took on his demon form and his strength and speed increased exponentially. Trying to escape? Suddenly, Su Zimo's voice sounded in the thousand-faced assassin's ears. It was cold and sinister right in front of him. End of chapter. Chapter 449. A figure seemed to move before him and the thousand-faced assassin stopped in his tracks hurriedly. Unknowingly, Su Zimo had already arrived in front of him with a domineering aura that sealed his path of retreat. It was too fast. Even with the thousand-faced assassin's mental state, he felt waves of fear at that moment. His expression changed slightly as a hint of panic flashed through his dead fish eyes. A tall figure stood up slowly from the ground and scarlet demonic chi rumbled, transforming into ferocious ancient demons one after another. They were lifelike with ferocious gazes and menacing fangs and claws. Like the stars surrounding the moon, Su Zimo looked down at the thousand-faced assassin with his pitch-black eyes that were bright and profound as he was surrounded by ancient demons. His gaze was cold and mocking. It was as though he was looking at an ant that was scurrying for its life. Pust! The thousand-faced assassin felt his heart skip a beat and a chill run down his spine. The next moment, Su Zimo suddenly extended his gigantic palm and covered his heart. If not for the fact that they were facing the human emperor's palace, given the pride of the fiend sects, they would definitely not have joined forces with the immortal and Buddhist sections. However, that was the human emperor's inheritance. Who in the world wouldn't be tempted? Furthermore, the combat strength displayed by Su Zimo was way too terrifying. They had no choice but to join forces to suppress him. Right then, Su Zimo's cold voice sounded as he enunciated word by word. Since that's the case, I'll give you guys a reason to attack. Snap! Su Zimo exerted strength in his palm and Bai Yu's throat was crushed. The fiend heir of Shura sect was dead. Chapter 450. With Bai Yu's death, the vicinity of the human emperor's palace fell into a dead silence. The cultivators who were watching from afar were dumbfounded as they stared at the scene in disbelief. It was way too domineering. This person did not even care about the threat of a sealer. Even though he had already offended the immortal and Buddhist sects, the successor of Divine Phoenix Island had no reservations and was decisive to kill the two fiend heirs domineeringly. In other words, he was saying that even if all the paragons of the immortal, Buddhist and fiend sects were to join forces, he would still have nothing to fear. Emperors were the top existences in Tianhuang mainland and none of the cultivators present, including the sealers, had the chance to witness their peerless might. However, at that moment, a thought flashed through everyone's minds. Back when the emperor was at Foundation Establishment Realm, he should not be as strong. It's over. Demoness Ji's heart sank. With Bai Yu's death, there was no turning back for both parties. Su Zimo was about to face a truly enraged sealer. Although he was in his twilight years, he was still a perfected Jin Dan. The paragons of the immortal, Buddhist and fiend sects looked at Su Zimo in the middle of the battlefield, as though they were looking at a dead man with a hint of mockery and pity in their eyes. There was no need for them to make a move. The Shura sect sealer who had just entered the battlefield was more than enough to kill Su Zimo. Su Zimo's expression was unchanged against the incoming blood-robed old man. Scarlet demonic chi coiled around him and his aura did not decrease as his eyes shone with a ferocious glint. I don't care what you are. The blood-robed old man glared at Su Zimo with a thick killing intent. His aura rose continuously as he said slowly, I'm going to kill you right now. Before he finished his sentence, a saber appeared in the blood-robed old man's hands. Swash! Although it was only a supreme-grade spirit weapon, coupled with the power of a Jin Dan realm, a torrential saber beam with blood chi burst forth and arrived before Su Zimo instantly. A ghostly wail sounded. It was as if a mountain of corpses and a sea of blood had appeared before Su Zimo's eyes, causing him to feel uneasy. The next moment, to everyone's surprise, Su Zimo actually took a step forward, clenched his right fist, and smashed it fiercely against the long saber that was slashing at him. You really don't know the meaning of death? There's no other way. It's too late to retreat. I might as well face it head-on and die with more dignity. The Sky Pride sneered. She turned her head away, as though she could not bear to watch. Boom! The fist and the saber collided, and an earth-shattering sound erupted. Everyone was dumbfounded as they stared at the scene on the battlefield in disbelief. There wasn't the bloody scene that everyone had imagined. When the saber landed on Su Zimo's right fist, it actually did not split it in half. After a momentary pause, Su Zimo grunted and spat out a mouthful of blood. His body was sent flying by the saber and he landed on the ground far away, motionless as the scarlet demonic chi on his body dissipated gradually. At the same time, a few dark cracks appeared behind the blood-robed old man, as though the voids were being torn apart forcefully. A sinister wind gusted and sent chills down one's spine. A dimensional tear. The blood-robed old man's gaze dimmed. This was the fate of sealers. Since they broke the rules of the ancient battlefield, they had to be punished. However, he had no regrets now that he was able to kill Su Zimo. Although Su Zimo withstood the sharpness of the spirit saber, the blood-robed old man believed that this 7 Meridian Foundation establishment cultivator would definitely not be able to withstand the power of a Jin Dan realm. A powerful ripping force descended. Uncontrollably, the blood-robed old man was pulled into the dimensional tear and streaks of blood appeared on his face. He was about to be torn into pieces by the dimensional tear. All of a sudden, Su Zimo, who was initially sprawled on the ground, moved and coughed a few times before rising slowly. He was not dead? The blood-robed old man had an agitated expression and his eyes were filled with endless indignation. He opened his mouth as though he wanted to say something. The next moment, there was a bang and the blood-robed old man vanished, turning into a blood mist without a corpse. A moment later, the rifts in the voids healed gradually. That mad blade of Divine Phoenix Island is truly frightening. Even a sealer couldn't kill him with his full strength. Even if he's not dead, he's not far from it. I reckon that his organs are already shattered, and he won't be able to live for long. How did he defend against that saber bare-handed? I'm not sure. If Su Zimo was carrying a defensive spirit weapon, his palms would definitely shine with the light of spirit patterns. However, when the two of them clashed earlier on, everyone could clearly see that Su Zimo was bare-handed. The reason why he was able to defend against perfected Jin Dan's saber bare-handed was naturally because of his blood-bone palm. If he had received the attack with his left hand, Su Zimo's entire left arm would have been crippled by that slash. However, although the blood-bone palm could defend against the sharpness of spirit weapons, it could not defend against perfected Jin Dan's strength completely. That sort of power was almost destructive against Foundation establishment cultivators. However, Su Zimo's body was way too strong and his regeneration speed was shocking. This was a body that was even more terrifying than pure-blooded ferocious beasts. Although his organs were shaken and Su Zimo spat out a mouthful of blood, his injuries were mostly healed within a few breaths. A single sealer was not enough to hurt Su Zimo's foundation. Rustling sounds could be heard as many figures surrounded Su Zimo once more. This time round, apart from the 8 paragons of the immortal and Buddhist sects, even the remaining 3 fiend heirs of the fiend sects walked forward and glared at Su Zimo coldly. All of them drew their weapons with killing intent on their faces. Apart from Demonish G, all the paragons were prepared to join forces to kill Su Zimo completely. They would take his life while he was down. However, all the paragons had miscalculated something. Su Zimo was not as severely injured as everyone had imagined. For him, that minor injury was almost negligible. Furthermore, the attack of the sealers and the combined forces of the paragons of the immortal, Buddhist and fiend sects had triggered the ferocity in Su Zimo's heart. There was no fairness in the cultivation world at all. The paragons of the various major sects joined forces and many of them had the backing of sealers of their sections. However, Su Zimo was alone without any helpers or the protection of sealers of his sections. However, the more that was the case, the more Su Zimo wanted to fight. He firmly believed that what Daiyu imparted to him was definitely not weaker than the secret skills of the immortal, Buddhist and fiend sects. He firmly believed that even if all the paragons joined forces, they would not be able to suppress him. He firmly believed that even without the support of a strong sect, he could break through everything and reach the peak. Fufufu. Su Zimo laughed and surveyed his surroundings with a demonic glint in his eyes. His battle intent was torrential as he said slowly, "Good, good, good. Since you guys want to join forces, I'll take all of you down." What arrogance! Sword Sex Hang Choyu sneered, Mad Blade. You don't have to put up a strong front. I don't believe that you'll have any strength left to fight after receiving a full-powered attack from a sealer. Bewitching Sex Shangguan Yu opened his folding fan and said sinisterly, Mad Blade, you're a demon. Even if the immortal, Buddhist and fiend sects join forces, we'll only be killing foreign races and enforcing justice on behalf of the heavens. That's right. Ao Yuxiao said in a deep voice. Those who aren't of our race are bound to have ulterior motives. Everyone has the right to kill a beast like you. End of chapter. Chapter 451. You called me a beast and now you want to kill me? Su Zimo's blood chi exploded and a scarlet demonic chi surged into the air. Glaring at Ao Yuxiao coldly, he smirked and said coldly, I'll kill you first. Being of another race and enforcing justice on behalf of the heavens were merely excuses. Even if Su Zimo did not take on his demon form, the paragons of the immortal, Buddhist and fiend sects would still join forces to kill him. The human emperor's inheritance was right before their eyes. Who wouldn't be tempted? There was no fairness or reason in the cultivation world. It was way too common to kill and snatch treasures. It was the cruel law of the jungle where the strong preyed on the weak. It was no different from Songlang mountain range. Every single cultivator's hands were stained with endless blood. The higher one's cultivation realm was, the more corpses there would be beneath their feet. Boom! Su Zimo stomped on the ground with a deafening bang. In the blink of an eye, he had already vanished from the spot and was sprinting towards Ao Yuxiao. He was too fast. In fact, a series of afterimages were even left in the void. Ao Yuxiao's expression changed starkly. Before he could react, a sharp malevolent aura had already surged over in a suffocating manner. A tall and burly figure approached, shrouded in scarlet demonic chi. His eyes were frighteningly bright and shone with a demonic glint with a chilling killing intent. Under the corrosion of the rich demonic chi, the purple chi around Ao Yuxiao melted rapidly like snow under the scorching sun. Condense! Seeing that it was too late to dodge, Ao Yuxiao hollered and crushed a protection talisman with one hand while conjuring hand seals with the other. Instantly the spirit chi in midair boiled. Spirit chi and purple chi gathered continuously in front of Ao Yuxiao, forming a long sword with purple chi that surged into the heavens. It was sharp and pointed at the incoming Su Zimo. Break! Su Zimo closed in and hollered. Swinging his arm, the veins on his fist popped and flesh bulged. It expanded rapidly like a gigantic seal and descended rapidly. Boom! The seal and the purple sword collided with each other, resulting in a deafening explosion. The purple sword was shattered by a single punch from Su Zimo. Ao Yuxiao's entire body shook violently. He spat out a mouthful of blood and staggered back. Before he could even catch his breath, Ao Yuxiao felt his vision darken. Yet another fist that had transformed into a gigantic seal came crashing down on him, emitting an endless ferocious aura. The second punch descended. Crack! In front of the demonized Su Zimo, the protective talisman was like a piece of paper, and was shattered with a single punch. Puff! Following that, his fist smashed down, smashing Ao Yuxiao's head into mush. The prodigy of the Purple Firmament sect had fallen. It wasn't just the cultivators who were watching from afar. Even the dozens of sealers outside the human emperor's palace were stunned. An 8 Meridian Foundation establishment cultivator. Under the hands of this descendant of Divine Phoenix Island, he couldn't even last 3 moves and was killed by 2 punches. Furthermore, this person had already suffered heavy injuries from the sealer's all-out attack. How could he possibly unleash such terrifying power? Crack! A bolt of lightning struck the top of Su Zimo's head. Zephyr Thunder Palace's successor's eyes lit up as he roared in laughter. Haha! You won't be able to last much longer after being struck by my Zephyr Thunder Palace's secret skill. Under normal circumstances, the power of thunder was the most effective against fiends and ghosts. Unfortunately, Su Zimo's bloodline contained the power of thunder as well. The power of thunder released by Zephyr Thunder Palace's secret skill surged into his body and was devoured by Su Zimo's bloodline right away, causing his blood chi to rise. Swash! Before Zephyr Thunder Palace's successor could stop laughing, Su Zimo's figure flashed and arrived before him almost instantly. That person was scared out of his wits and his face was frightfully pale. Even if one wasn't severely injured after being struck by Zephyr Thunder Palace's secret skill, it would be difficult for them to break free from the numbness effect of the thunder within a short period of time. He had never seen someone like Su Zimo who was still alive and kicking after being struck by thunder without being affected at all. "Fellow Taoists, save me!" That person shrieked and withdrew a mirror from his storage bag. Injecting spirit energy into it, it expanded instantly and blazing lightning crackled on the surface of the mirror, blocking in front of him. Boom! Su Zimo punched it. Crack! 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 The lightning dissipated and a series of cracks appeared on the surface of the mirror. That person's arms that were supporting the thunder mirror snapped, and he was sent flying by a tremendous force. Landing at the edge of the human emperor's palace, he coughed out blood repeatedly and fainted. Su Zimo was about to head forward and kill that person in a single move when the other paragons had already arrived. Snowdrift Valley's secret skill, Chaos Essence Sex Flying Sword, Monk Juchen's Diamond Staff, Hang Qiuyu's startling sword. Spirit arts filled the skies and sword chi streaked everywhere. Resplendent runes surged towards Su Zimo like a torrential downpour, almost engulfing him. Despite the situation, Su Zimo was still calm and composed with a deep gaze. Relying on his unfathomable spirit perception, Su Zimo weaved through the dense attacks with nimble movements and light footsteps. In order to avoid the attacks, Su Zimo's body would occasionally twist to strange angles. This was already beyond the knowledge of many paragons. In a flash, Su Zimo arrived before the successor of Clear Wind Temple and punched through the latter's chest. The successor of Clear Wind Temple was dead. None of these paragons could withstand a single move from Su Zimo once he got close to them. In his demon form, Su Zimo's explosive strength and speed were way too terrifying. He could sweep through any strong foes of the Foundation Establishment realm. Secret skill, Illusion Fiend. The Fiend Heir of Illusion Fiend Cult hollered softly and reached out with his palm, floating past Su Zimo's eyes. His fingers were agile and unpredictable with a rhythm, conjuring images one after another that seemed both real and illusory. Illusion Fiend Cult's secret skill could evoke the evil thoughts in a cultivator's heart and create mental demons that they could not extricate themselves from, or even turn them into fiends. Unfortunately, Su Zimo's gaze was sharp and resolute. He could not be shaken at all. In his eyes, the methods of the Fiend Heir of Illusion Fiend Cult were like the tricks of a 3-year-old child that could not withstand a single blow. What kind of dogsh *T secret skill is that? What a disgrace! Su Zimo bent his knee forward and broke through the layers of illusions, striking the chest of the Fiend Heir of Illusion Fiend Cult. In midair, the body of the Fiend Heir of Illusion Fiend Cult shattered into pieces of flesh that fell down with a blood stench. Die! Pang Yu wielded his pitch-black spear and released the power of his bloodline. Spirit energy surged within his 8 spirit meridians and his strength was pushed to its limits as he stabbed towards Su Zimo's head viciously. Get lost! Su Zimo hollered and spun around, throwing out a punch in reverse. His right fist with the blood-colored bone collided against the tip of the pitch-black spear with a crushing force. Pang Yu felt a surging power surge through the spear. It was unstoppable. There was a momentary pause. Blood drained from Pang Yu's face as he cried out in pain. His palm split and blood gushed out. The pitch-black spear in his hands was sent flying by a single punch from Su Zimo. The spear struck towards Shangguan Yu of Illusion Sect who was charging over not far away. Shangguan Yu opened his folding fan. The moment he placed it on the spear, his expression changed starkly as he twisted his body hurriedly, wanting to avoid the incoming spear. However, the power of the spear that was sent flying by a single punch from Su Zimo was still not something he could withstand. Poof! Although Shangguan Yu managed to avoid his vitals, his shoulder was still pierced by the spear, revealing a fist-sized hole and the bones around his shoulder were shattered. Pang Yu's arms trembled uncontrollably and drooped by the sides of his body. His aura was completely gone as he fled, muttering with a quivering voice, "Invincible! Invincible!" Even the most belligerent and rebellious fiend heir of Overlord Palace had to bow his head in front of Su Zimo. End of chapter. Su Zimo's blood splattered on the startling sword. The spirit light on the sword dimmed gradually, as though it was corroded by some sort of power. Pust! Hang Choyu's eyes were filled with fear as he looked at the blood on the startling sword. Nobody could sense the fear in his heart right now. What sort of bloodline did this person have that he could even suppress the spirit light of a perfect spirit weapon? What did this mean? This meant that if a perfect spirit artifact was soaked in this person's blood, it wouldn't take long for this perfect spirit artifact to be destroyed. There were many illusory legends in the cultivation world. In the ancient books of Sword Sect, there was a saying that a single drop of blood from an immortal could shatter mountains, pierce through the voids and kill ancient mighty figures. Initially, Hang Choyu did not think much of those legends. Even if it was an immortal, could the power of their bloodline be so terrifying and exaggerated? It was only at this moment that Hang Choyu truly realized that a person's bloodline could truly be cultivated to that realm. The person before him was only at Foundation Establishment realm, and yet, the power of his bloodline was already this strong. If this person truly became a mighty figure, patriarch or an immortal of legends, a single drop of his blood would be enough to destroy all living beings in an entire region. Right now, even the startling sword was no longer in Hang Choyu's control, let alone crippling that person's palm. After being soaked in Su Zimo's blood, Hang Choyu could clearly sense that his connection with the startling sword was gradually fading and could be severed at any moment. Amidba. Wielding his diamond staff, Monk Juchen's body shone with a golden glow. His gaze was bright and inviolable as he arrived before Su Zimo and hollered, "Demon, I'm here to save you. You're not qualified." Su Zimo's expression was unchanged as he gripped his empty right hand into a fist and punched towards the incoming diamond staff. Bang! Monk Juchen's body shuddered and his palm tore apart as the diamond staff flew out of his hands. Gripping the startling sword with his left hand, Su Zimo took a huge step forward with his right leg and closed in. Before Monk Juchen could react, a figure bumped over and pressed itself against his chest, leaning slightly against him. Ugh! Monk Juchen's eyes widened. A terrifying power surged into his body through the other party's body. Monk Juchen's mind went blank and he was sent flying. Bang! Landing heavily on the ground, Monk Juchen spat out a mouthful of blood and his gaze dimmed. His protection talisman was shattered, and so was the golden barrier created by the Diamond Sutra. One after another, streaks of blood appeared on Monk Juchen's face. They were densely packed and were a shocking sight. Even his flesh was torn apart. He's not dead? Su Zimo frowned slightly. Now that he had taken on his demon form, his strength had increased exponentially. Even 10 Monk Juchens would be dead if he leaned in. Su Zimo's gaze shifted to the golden kasaya draped over Monk Juchen's body, and he understood. That golden kasaya was definitely an extremely strong defensive spirit weapon. Otherwise, even someone with an invincible diamond body would have been smashed into a blood mist. Monk Juchen stood up with difficulty. His arrogance was completely gone as he staggered outside like a stray dog. Ha 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 ha. Su Zimo roared in laughter and glared at Monk Juchen's fleeing back view, shouting, "You want to save me with that bit of cultivation? Go back and recite your sutras for another 10 years. When he heard that, Monk Juchen's legs gave way and he nearly fell. As the successor of Diamond Monastery and a paragon of the Buddhist monasteries, when had he ever suffered such humiliation? Monk Juchen was infuriated and felt utterly humiliated. He was so aggrieved that he spat out another mouthful of blood. After spitting out that mouthful of blood, Monk Juchen's chest felt much better and he sighed deeply once more. That man is truly invincible among the Foundation Establishment realm. At that moment, everyone realized that after this battle, as long as the successor of Divine Phoenix Island was still alive, he would be the number 1 person below Jean Dan. End of chapter. Chapter 453. The battle was not over yet. At the same time that Su Zimo sent Monk Juchun flying, he gripped the startling sword in his left hand and wrestled with Hang Qiuyu. The remaining 4 paragons attacked together. Snowdrift Valley's Ling Han burst out with a secret skill. Chaos Essence Sex Chan Yitzi summoned his flying sword from afar, not daring to advance. Wisdom Monastery's successor tapped the ground and closed in. His hands conjured many afterimages as he released the ultimate secret skill of Wisdom Monastery, Wisdom Palm. Wisdom Palm possessed the divine power to strike a bull through a mountain. Even though there were no injuries on the surface, one's organs would be shattered by a single palm strike. It was extremely impressive. Even Monk Juchun, who cultivated the Diamond Sutra, did not dare to take Wisdom Palm head-on. The palm wind was like a blade and the afterimages were chaotic, making it difficult to differentiate the real from the fake. Go! Formless Monastery's successor took out a copper alms bowl from his storage bag and injected spirit energy. The copper alms bowl shone with a blinding golden light that was divine and flawless. Lowering its mouth, it poured down a divine waterfall of light and tossed it towards Su Zimo's head while chanting. The 4 paragons attacked at the same time, but Su Zimo's right hand was the only one free. Chaos Essence Sex Chan Yitzi's flying sword was the first to arrive. Without hesitation, Su Zimo reached out with his right hand and grabbed the flying sword in his palm. Ice Seal! His voice was cold as ice and the surrounding temperature plummeted. From head to toe, Su Zimo's body began to freeze, and even the scarlet demonic chi that shrouded him was covered in a layer of frost. Ice Seal spirit energy and blood chi. At the same time, the copper alms bowl arrived above Su Zimo's head and descended slowly, emitting a terrifying might that wanted to suppress him within the copper alms bowl. Wisdom Monastery's successor closed in and released many afterimages of his palm. Su Zimo gripped the startling sword in his left hand and Chan Yitzi's flying sword in his right. He could not free himself. Coupled with Snowdrift Valley's secret skill and the descent of Formless Monastery's Buddhist spirit weapon copper alms bowl, many powers burst at the same time and restrained him on the spot, unable to move at all. Bang! 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 More than 10 consecutive palms landed on Su Zimo's body. With every palm strike, Su Zimo's body would tremble, and a trace of blood would flow out from the corner of his mouth. Seeing this scene, all the paragons were shocked. At this point in the battle, this divine Phoenix Island descendant had finally been wounded. Immediately after, Hang Qiuyu and the others noticed that even so, that person was still standing tall with a ramrod straight, and the coldness in his eyes grew even more intense. He's still not dead? The successor of Wisdom Monastery finally understood the fear in the hearts of Monk Juchun and the others. More than 10 great wisdom palms, this person actually withstood them. If it was anyone else, their internal organs would have long been smashed into smithereens after receiving these dozen or so palm strikes. However, this person seemed to be completely fine, and the murderous glint in his eyes did not diminish. Among the body refining techniques, even the top body refining techniques of the human clan could only be cultivated to the level of marrow cleansing and blood exchanging. It was very difficult to cultivate the 5 viscera and 6 bowels. However, there was a organs refinement section in the mystic classic of the 12 demon kings of the great wilderness. Su Zimo's organs were also stronger than most pure-blooded ferocious beasts. Otherwise, there was no way he could have such frightening stamina to fight until now. After receiving more than 10 great wisdom palms, Su Zimo's organs were merely shaken and his foundation was not damaged. Suppress! Formless Monastery's successor hollered and interlocked his fingers, conjuring hand seals and shooting out beams of spirit light into the copper bowl. The copper bowl expanded rapidly and descended continuously. Helpless, Hang Qiuyu could only let go of the startling sword. In the blink of an eye, the copper bowl that shone with a blinding light enveloped Su Zimo and pinned him to the ground. It was over? When they saw that, even the sealers that rushed over slowed down gradually. Umitba, Formless Monastery's successor, chanted a Buddhist proclamation and walked towards the gigantic copper bowl that was taller than a person, saying in a deep voice, "Fellow Taoists, don't worry. Once you enter my copper bowl, even a pure-blooded ferocious beast will turn into pus and die within an incense's time." The paragons heaved a sigh of relief and were momentarily dazed. Formless Monastery's successor arrived before the copper bowl and lowered his gaze with a dignified expression. He chanted and the light of the copper bowl intensified. Suddenly a change happened. Boom! A deafening sound echoed from the copper bowl. The expressions of Hang Qiuyu and the others changed starkly as they shifted their gazes and their pupils constricted when they caught sight of the gigantic copper bowl. A huge bump protruded from the side of the copper bowl in the shape of a fist. How terrifying was the power required to create a fist mark on a spirit weapon of the Buddhist monasteries. The golden light of the copper bowl dimmed slightly. Bang! 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 Before anyone could react, a series of explosions sounded and fist marks appeared on the copper bowl one after another in all directions. There was a momentary pause. An extremely dangerous aura was emitted from within the copper bowl. Hurry, retreat! Formless Monastery's old monk hollered. Boom! There was a deafening explosion that caused the ground to quake. The gigantic copper bowl before them exploded into shards that flew in all directions with a rumbling shockwave. A tall and mighty figure appeared in front of everyone once more. Shrouded in demonic qi, his demonic eyes shone with a sinister glint and his aura was torrential. The first to suffer was Formless Monastery's successor who was closest to him. When he was struck by the power, his body was riddled with holes by the copper bowl shards and he died on the spot. Su Zimo flipped his startling sword and flung it out. Breaking through his limits, he arrived before Snowdrift Valley's Ling Han in the blink of an eye. Condense! Ling Han's expression changed starkly as she conjured a frost spirit mirror in front of her that emitted a bone-chilling intent. Boom! The startling sword struck the frost spirit mirror heavily. After a short pause, cracks appeared on the spirit mirror. In an instant, the surface of the spirit mirror was covered with dense cracks. Then it shattered into pieces. Chapter 454. A resolute look flashed through Hang Qiuyu's eyes as he turned and fled. Humph! Su Zimo harumphed coldly and strode forward, catching up to Hang Qiuyu in a few steps. Extending his right hand, he clenched it into a fist and smashed it down viciously on the other party's back. Boom! The gigantic fist resembled a gigantic seal that struck down. If he was struck, he would die even if he had 10 lives. Sword escape! Hang Qiuyu did not panic in the face of danger and hollered deeply. Instantly, sword qi surged within his body and exploded. Like an unsheathed sword, he turned into a streak of light and sped forward in a flash. His speed had already broken through his limits. This was a secret skill of sword sect that was similar to blood escape and lasted for a shorter period of time. Of course, the side effects were much lesser as well. Initially, the gigantic seal above his head was already descending. However, Hang Qiuyu's sudden burst of speed caused it to miss in the blink of an eye. Hang Qiuyu was delighted. He could already see more than 10 sealers charging over. As long as he could hold on for a couple of breaths, the situation would be reversed instantly. Right then, the sound of a bowstring being drawn sounded in Hang Qiuyu's ears. Bam! 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 Hang Qiuyu glanced sideways and looked behind. This one glance scared him out of his wits and scared him out of his wits. Su Zimo was right behind him, following him like a shadow. His eyes shone with a demonic glint and killing intent as his tendons and bones rang in unison. As his tendons stretched, his arm expanded by more than 3 feet. How was that the arm of a human? That was clearly the trunk of a primordial divine elephant that pierced through the firmaments as though it could smash stars and shatter the voids. Instantly it caught up to Hang Qiuyu and smashed down. There was no way to avoid it. In a flash, Hang Qiuyu summoned a shimmering silver circle from his storage bag and twisted his body, smashing it towards the fist behind him. Boom! There was a deafening sound that shook the world. As though he was struck by lightning, the sound of bones cracking echoed from Hang Qiuyu's entire arm. Poof! Hang Qiuyu spat out a mouthful of blood and was sent flying with a pale face. Even though he managed to preserve his life with the help of his innate spiritual artifact, he still fainted on the spot and fell to the ground motionless. At this point of the battle, the paragons of the immortal, Buddhist and fiend sects were either dead, injured or fleeing. Demoness Ji was the only one left standing not far away, watching everything with a dumbfounded expression. She finally understood why Su Zimo had to change his appearance and even his figure. He was afraid that someone would recognize him. After this battle, Su Zimo had offended almost the entire cultivation world. Not to mention those who were severely injured or crippled, there were as many as 7 paragons who died in his hands. At that moment, Demoness Ji did not know that if she included Shui Yang of Malevolent Earth Sect who was in the Fog Valley outside Xintian City, there were a total of 8 paragons who died in the hands of Su Zimo. Once his identity was exposed, there was a high chance that he would be hunted down by experts from the Immortal, Buddhist and Fiend sects. Although the world is big, there may not be a place to settle down. Of course, what Su Zimo needed to consider now was not anything else but how to survive. More than 10 sealers had already arrived below the human emperor's palace. Among them, the sealers of Sword Sect and Drifting Snow Sect brought their successors away from the battlefield and tried their best to treat them. However, there were 5 old men with killing intent and terrifying auras that surrounded Su Zimo. Purple Firmament Sect, Clear Wind Temple, Illusion Fiend Cult, Chaos Essence Sect and Formless Monastery. The purple sword tore through the air and a gigantic ravine appeared on the ground. Mud rumbled and sand flew in a frightening manner. Su Zimo had cultivated the mystic classic of the 12 demon kings of the Great Wilderness to lesser mastery of the orifice clearing section. His cultivation realm was 7 Meridian Foundation establishment. Be it immortal or demon, Su Zimo had yet to cultivate them to their limits. Even in his demon form, his strength was not comparable to that of a perfected being Jin Dan. Against a sealer in his twilight years, Su Zimo might still have a chance of winning. However, he had no chance of winning if all 5 sealers attacked at the same time. He had to survive. At that moment of life and death, Su Zimo's strength was already channeled to its limits as his bloodline rumbled and his tendons and bones rang. Demonic chi rumbled and transformed into ferocious demon beasts one after another. They were lifelike, murderous and menacing. There were wild bulls that raised their horns and plowed the heavens, bear demons that roared upright, coiling anacondas, armed demon apes, roar. Taking a deep breath of air, Su Zimo puffed up his chest and paused for a moment before letting out a deafening roar in the direction of the old man of Purple Firmament Sect. The many ancient demons that coiled around him opened their mouths and roared at the same time. Su Zimo was like the king of all demons. Instantly the world changed. It was April Fool's Day, and he wanted to say that he would add more chapters to fool everyone. However, he decided against it later on. What if everyone took it for real? End of chapter. Chapter 455. The ferocious aura emanating from Su Zimo was such that even the 5 sealers felt their hearts skip a beat. This lad must not be allowed to live. At 7 Meridian Foundation establishment, he was already able to suppress paragons of the Immortal, Buddhist and Fiend sections. If he were to obtain the human emperor's inheritance as well, it was unimaginable and unimaginable. The stronger Su Zimo appeared and the greater his potential, the more determined the 5 sealers were to kill him. Scarlet demonic chi rumbled in one after another. The ancient demons seemed corporeal as they roared and charged forward, biting and clashing against the incoming purple sword. Bang! 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 The sword tore through the air with a boundless might and a frightening aura, shattering the ancient demons conjured from demonic chi one after another. The 2 powers of purple chi and demonic chi clashed repeatedly. With every single demon beast that dissipated, the scarlet demonic chi around Su Zimo's body would dim slightly. As for the purple sword, it was clear that it was not as strong as before and its glow dimmed gradually. Boom! It was yet another deafening sound. The purple sword collided with the final demon beast. All the demon beasts and demonic chi dissipated, and the purple sword turned into streams of purple chi that returned to the world. The full-powered attack of Purple Firmament Sex Sealer was blocked by Su Zimo. Furthermore, he was able to defend against it unscathed. Su Zimo panted heavily. This time it almost exhausted all the strength in his body. He had been fighting ever since he arrived at this place. If not for the fact that he cultivated the mystic classic of the 12 demon kings of the Great Wilderness for years and possessed shocking stamina and blood chi, he would have been exhausted long ago. Now that he blocked the attack of Purple Firmament Sex Sealer, Su Zimo felt waves of weakness surge through his heart and his limbs felt weak. He was completely exhausted. If not for the fact that he was surrounded by strong enemies, he would have collapsed long ago. There was only a single outcome for a sealer to release his Jin Dan realm strength. He would trigger a dimensional tear in the ancient battlefield that would tear him apart mercilessly and devour him. A series of cracks appeared behind Purple Firmament Sec's old man, dark and mysterious as sinister winds howled. Su Zimo looked over and smirked coldly with a mocking look in his eyes. Purple Firmament Sec's old man grit his teeth with an indignant expression and barked coldly, "Be *****, you don't have to be smug. Before long, you'll have to come down to accompany me, huh?" It was a tragic cry. Purple Firmament Sec's old man was ripped into pieces by the dimensional tear and devoured cleanly without a corpse. A moment later, the space stabilized and the crack closed. Swash! A huge silver light descended from the sky with a terrifying aura. The old Taoist from Clear Wind Temple had flung out his horsetail whisk and 3,000 silver threads extended dozens of feet, forming a gigantic silver rod that smashed toward Su Zimo's head. Taking a deep breath of air, Su Zimo reached out with his right hand and extended his fingers, grabbing towards the incoming silver rod. Bang! The sound of firmament secta beat. Su Zimo's eyes dimmed as he spat out a mouthful of blood. "Thankfully I have this blood-bone palm. Otherwise my arm would have been shattered by this old Taoist's attack." At that thought, Su Zimo rejoiced internally. Suddenly, Sec's old man chuckled with a mocking gaze. Su Zimo's expression changed. Suddenly, the silver staff in his palm dispersed and the 3,000 strands of black silk whipped Su Zimo's back fiercely. Piak! Blood flashed and the sound of bones cracking could be heard. Su Zimo's face was pale as he staggered and nearly fell to his knees. The change was extremely sudden. In the old Taoist's hands, the horsetail whisk seemed to have a life of its own, switching between hardness and gentleness in a sentient manner. Su Zimo's back was badly mangled from the whip as though it was sliced by countless sharp blades. His torn clothes were stuck to his back in a tragic manner. The shoulder blades on his back had been smashed and broken. The blood-red bone stubble was exposed. It was a ghastly sight. It was only at this moment that Su Zimo experienced another terrifying aspect of the mystic classic of the 12 demon kings of the Great Wilderness. His vitality was shocking. If it was any other cultivator or ordinary living being, their vitality would have been severed and they would be deader than dead with their organs shattered and severely injured. However, at that moment Su Zimo could still stand. With every breath, he could feel his injuries healing bit by bit. However, the speed was extremely slow due to his severe injuries. "He's not dead yet?" When he saw Su Zimo standing up slowly, Sec's old Taoist from Clear Wind Temple widened his eyes in disbelief. That attack of his was enough to destroy the body of any Foundation establishment cultivator. However, to think that Su Zimo would be able to stand up once more. "What a pity I was so close." Sec's old Taoist from Clear Wind Temple sighed indignantly. He no longer had a chance. A dimensional tear appeared and devoured him directly. The horsetail whisk in his hands was torn to shreds by the tear. Buzz! Almost at the same time, a sword hum sounded. "Go!" Chaos Essence Sec's sealer attacked and summoned his flying sword, pointing it at Su Zimo. A stream of light arrived in an instant. It was the simplest and most effective method of a cultivator's killing. The moment Chaos Essence Sec's sealer attacked, Su Zimo felt a sense of danger. Without time to think, Su Zimo grit his teeth and dodged to the side in a flash. Poof! An arrow of blood shot out. Su Zimo was still a step too late. The sword pierced his left chest and exited through his body. Although it avoided the vital point of his heart, piercing his left chest was enough to be fatal. Instantly, Su Zimo's breathing became extremely difficult, as though there was a raging fire burning in the depths of his throat. He coughed out blood repeatedly and his body shuddered. His injuries were way too severe this time round. Up till this point of his cultivation, he had never suffered such severe injuries. Although his body's regeneration capabilities were strong, there was a limit to it. It was unknown if he could recover from such injuries. Furthermore, this was the ancient battlefield and no one would give him the chance to do so. Buzz! In midair, the moment the flying sword pierced Su Zimo's chest, it turned around instantly and charged back. It was clear that Chaos Essence Sec's sealer was skilled in sword wielding. An unprecedented aura of death surged over Even without the warning of his spirit perception, Su Zimo knew that he was already half a step into the gates of hell. If he could not dodge this sword, he would definitely die. Bang! Stomping his feet on the ground, Su Zimo used the last bit of strength in his body to leap to the side. Shing! Blood flashed and he felt a sharp pain in his abdomen that penetrated deep into his bones. Blood drained from Su Zimo's face as his legs went limp and he almost fell to the ground. His stamina was already depleted, and coupled with the fact that he was severely injured, it was already extremely fortunate that he was able to avoid being struck at his vitals. That sword sliced a bloody wound on his abdomen. Hurriedly, Su Zimo covered it with his hands to prevent his intestines from flowing out. Fresh blood flowed through the gaps of his fingers and seeped through his robes, emitting a strong stench of blood. In the blink of an eye, Su Zimo was covered in blood. He felt dizzy and on the verge of collapsing. His life force was draining rapidly in an irreversible manner. Am I going to die? Su Zimo murmured softly and his vision blurred. It was as though a blood-colored figure flashed by in an incomparably stunning manner. Even though many years had passed, that figure was still imprinted in the depths of his memories, never fading or forgetting. It was clear as though it was yesterday. Chapter 456. To think that Divine Phoenix Island would give birth to such a paragon. To think that he would die beneath the human emperor's palace. What a pity. 7 paragons and a few sealers in exchange for his life. Their deaths are worth it. Far away, many cultivators looked at the blood-stained and swaying figure on the battlefield with conflicted expressions as they discussed softly with pity. That lonely figure looked pitiful and sad. Many cultivators knew that the successor of Divine Phoenix Island was about to die, and even immortals would not be able to save him. Su Zimo was indeed in a terrible state. His left chest was pierced and blood flowed profusely. His shoulder blades were also broken and there was a ghastly wound on his abdomen. If not for the fact that he was gripping it tightly, his intestines would have spilled out. In fact, Su Zimo could even feel his life draining away bit by bit. Blood was still flowing. The injuries in his body showed no signs of healing. This meant that his injuries had already exceeded the limits of his body's regeneration capabilities. Before him, only Formless Monastery's old monk and illusion fiend cult sealer had yet to make a move. Even if the 2 sealers watched coldly from the sidelines, it wouldn't be long before his blood ran out and he would die. Su Zimo felt dizzy and his vision blurred as though a familiar blood-colored figure flashed past his mind. Miss Dai. Instinctively, Su Zimo called out softly. There was no reply. The figure before him turned slightly and frowned, glancing at him with endless worry and pity in her eyes. A faint fragrance drifted over and Su Zimo was invigorated as he tried his best to open his eyes. After a moment of shock, Su Zimo opened his mouth but said nothing in the end. Lowering his head slightly, he could not conceal the disappointment in his eyes. It was not Daiyu. It was Demoness Ji. His vision was blurred due to excessive blood loss. Coupled with the fact that he could not forget her over the years, Su Zimo mistook Demoness Ji's pink dress as blood red. She left a long time ago and won't return. In the end I couldn't catch up to her. There's no more chance. Heis. Su Zimo sighed deeply. His body swayed and his eyelids grew heavy. His will gradually sank into the endless abyss. At this moment, a voice entered his ears and pulled Su Zimo's consciousness back from the abyss of death. Seniors, please let him go. It was Demoness Ji's voice. She was right in front of Su Zimo. Which go away. The old monk of Formless Monastery walked over slowly, exuding a terrifying aura as he hollered. Even if the 2 seniors don't do anything, he won't be able to survive. What's wrong with leaving his corpse intact? Demoness Ji did not leave and continued speaking. The Buddhist sects are benevolent. Why must you be so ruthless? Only by killing him personally will there be no other variables. Formless Monastery's old monk was unmoved as his gaze flickered. Demoness, if you don't leave, don't blame me for killing you as well. After a brief silence, Demoness Ji's voice sounded once more. Although it was calm, it was earth-shattering. I can't obey you even if I'm angry. These 4 words revealed a kind of determination. It was a determination that would not waver or take a single step back, even if she knew that she was going to die. Suzimo was moved. She was facing a sealer who was completely enraged and could kill her with a single raise of his hand. Suzimo had not expected that Demoness G would stand out under such circumstances and stand in front of him without any hesitation, not backing down at all. That stupid woman. Suzimo's lips quivered and his voice was inaudible like a mosquito. All right then. Formless Monastery's old monk nodded expressionlessly. Suddenly, his eyes shone with killing intent as he said coldly, "Since you're bent on seeking death, I'll grant you your wish." Boom! The Jin Dan within Formless Monastery's old monk circulated and burst forth with the power of the Jin Dan realm. His aura surged as he struck brazenly. Formless finger. Extending a finger, Formless Monastery's old monk tapped gently in Demoness G's direction. Instantly the world trembled. How was that a finger? It was clearly a heavenly piercing stone pillar with a wanton might that streaked through the void and howled, as though it wanted to crush Demoness G into pieces. Suzimo grit his teeth and wanted to help Demoness G block the attack. However, he was too severely injured and could not move at all without any strength in his body. Demoness G blinked and ripples appeared in her beautiful eyes, emitting a bewitching light that landed in the eyes of Formless Monastery's old monk. Demoness G removed her veil and revealed a beautiful and flawless face, smiling sweetly, bewitching the world. Even the cultivators watching from afar were stunned on the spot, let alone Formless Monastery's old monk. Their mouths were agape and saliva flowed without them realizing it. That series of actions was not just limited to the bewitching eye. She had already unleashed the full power of the Pure Maiden Sutra. Although Formless Monastery's old monk was a perfected being Jin Dan, he had not cultivated the many secret skills of Diamond Monastery, and could not counter the Pure Maiden Sutra perfectly. His mind wavered and the power of the formless finger weakened. Go! At the same time, Demoness G summoned a ribbon that shone brightly and collided against the incoming formless finger. Bang! There was a deafening sound. Demoness G's expression changed starkly as her petite body trembled, and she staggered in retreat. With every step she took, she would cough out a mouthful of blood that was blinding. Not everyone could withstand a full-powered attack from a sealer like Suzimo. If not for the fact that Formless Monastery's old monk was distracted and the power of the formless finger was slightly dispersed, Demoness G would have been torn apart and died. Even so, by the time Demoness G retreated step by step to Suzimo, she was already severely injured and on the brink of death. The situation was critical. A series of sinister cracks appeared behind the old monk of Formless Monastery one after another. Humph! Formless Monastery's old monk had a dark expression as he sneered. Before I die, I'll give you guys a huge gift. I'll let you guys be a pair of lovebirds that share the same fate and meet Acheron together. Before he finished his sentence, a flame shot out from Formless Monastery's old monk's fingertip and arrived before the two of them instantly. The flame was scarlet with a hint of gold mixed within, giving off a shuddering aura. True fire. Above level 3 spirit fire was true fire. Only perfected being Jin Dan with a fire spirit root could cultivate true fire that was enough to incinerate all Foundation Establishment cultivators, and even pure-blooded ferocious beasts at Foundation Establishment realm. Suzimo's eyelids twitched wildly. He was a weapon refinement master to begin with and naturally knew how powerful true fire was. Previously, the reason why no sealers released true fire was because they were not cultivators with fire spirit roots. Taking a deep breath, Suzimo pushed Demoness G away with all his might and growled, "Hurry and leave." Swoosh! The moment the flame landed on Suzimo, it expanded and engulfed his entire body. In the blink of an eye, Suzimo was engulfed in flames. Chapter 457. Fufa. Suzimo's body was hunched over and his eyes were tightly shut. No one knew how much pain he was enduring as he let out a hoarse roar from the depths of his throat. The true fire burned fiercely, and his body twitched. His flesh and blood had already been burned black, and crackling sounds could be heard. It was a horrible sight to behold. In the light of the flames, Suzimo's face was faintly discernible. His facial features were contorted from the pain and were unrecognizable, looking somewhat menacing. Demoness G's heart ached at the sight of it and her eyes turned misty. Cough cough. Her internal injuries acted up and she coughed out 2 more mouthfuls of black blood with some shattered organs in a frightening manner. To think that I would still die here. Her eyes dimmed and she was on the verge of death. Her organs were badly damaged after receiving a full-powered attack from the sealer, and her life was draining rapidly. Unless she had extraordinary methods, she would definitely die. However, in the ancient battlefield, the person with the highest cultivation was perfected Jean Dan. Who could save her? How could that be? Suddenly, a soft exclamation sounded from not far away in disbelief. It was the voice of Illusion Fiend Cult Sealer. Instinctively, she followed the gaze of Illusion Fiend Cult's old man and looked at Su Zimo once more. At that moment, the true fire on Su Zimo's body was much smaller than before, and was even showing signs of extinguishing. Demoness G's mouth was slightly agape and a look of shock flashed through her eyes. Although Su Zimo was almost charred black with smoke billowing from his body, the flames on his body were indeed weakening. Or rather, they were shifting. The scorching flames tilted slightly and surged towards Su Zimo's right hand as though they were guided by some mysterious force, entering the blood-red bone palm. Apart from Su Zimo himself, nobody knew or could explain what was happening to him. Initially, his injuries were too severe and exceeded the limits of his body's regeneration. His wounds could not heal and were bleeding the entire time. If not for the true fire, he would have bled to death. However, it was precisely because of the burning of the true fire that the flesh around the 2 wounds was burnt to a crisp, temporarily stopping the bleeding and thus preserving his life. At the same time, the blood-colored bone palm seemed to undergo a slight change under the burning of the true fire. It was as if a seal had been undone, and some kind of power had been quietly awakened. Like a whale drinking water, it devoured the primordial fire on Su Zimo's body in large mouthfuls without any restraint. Before the true fire could threaten Su Zimo, more than half of it had already been devoured by the blood-colored bone palm. It could be said that by a freak combination of factors, the true fire had temporarily saved Su Zimo's life. A terrifying aura gradually grew and lingered around the blood-colored bone palm. Ta-da! The sound of footsteps could be heard. Murderous intent surged, almost suffocating him. Demoness G was shocked. Formless Monastery's old monk had already been devoured by the spatial tear behind him, leaving only Illusion Fiend Cult Sealer. The flames on Su Zimo's body had yet to dissipate. His eyes were closed and he stood on the spot like a piece of coal with a weak aura. She grit her teeth and supported herself with her trembling arms. After a few failures, she finally managed to stand up and staggered in front of Su Zimo. It was a simple action, but it expended the last of her strength. Her body swayed and she could not even stand properly, as though a gust of wind could blow her over. However, she raised her head and looked at the murderous Illusion Fiend Cult Sealer, who was striding over with an unprecedented resolute gaze. She knew that there was nothing she could do about her injuries. However, that might not be the case for Su Zimo. The Human Emperor's Palace. That might be Su Zimo's only chance of turning things around. There were many signs that indicated that Su Zimo was this generation's successor of the Human Emperor's Palace. As long as he could enter the Human Emperor's Palace, he might be able to survive. Of course, that was only a possibility. Nobody knew what was within the Human Emperor's Palace. The footsteps vanished. Arriving before Demoness G, the old man of Illusion Fiend Cult paused with a cold expression. Since you're so protective of him, could this little beast be your tripod? The sealer of Illusion Fiend Cult asked slowly and looked at Demoness G with a mocking gaze. So what if he is? Demoness G's expression darkened and her face was lifeless. Her life force was almost negligible. If not for her willpower, she would have collapsed a long time ago. Ha 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 ha. It was as though the old man of Illusion Fiend Cult had just heard the greatest joke in the world. The sealers of Overlord Palace and Cloud Rain Sect frowned and looked at Demoness G in disbelief as well. Stupid, truly stupid. After laughing enough, the old man of Illusion Fiend Cult shook his head and lamented. To think that the pure maiden of the fiend sex of this generation would be so infatuated that she would choose a cultivator as her tripod. What a joke. Demoness G pursed her lips and her eyelids turned heavy. She could no longer hear what the old man of Illusion Fiend cult was saying. All she could feel was a rumbling sound in her ears that was both near and far as her consciousness gradually faded. The reason why you're stalling for time even at the cost of your life is because you want this little beast to enter the human emperor's palace. The old man of Illusion Fiend cult sneered. Unfortunately, both of you have to die. I'll kill you today so that you won't embarrass Pure Maiden sect and the Fiend sects. The moment he said that, the killing intent in the old man's eyes intensified. Swiping his waist, he pulled out a soft sword that shone with a cold light. Piak! With a tremble, the soft sword straightened. Against two helpless and dying Foundation establishment cultivators, the old man of Illusion Fiend cult had no intention of holding back as he burst forth with the power of the Jin Dan realm and thrust his sword forward. That single thrust was enough to skewer both of their heads together. The sword chi was like frost with a wanton might. Demoness G could no longer hold on and fell backwards. Suddenly, an arm reached out and supported her body. The next moment, Demoness G caught sight of a person in her blurry vision. Although the person was charred black and unrecognizable, she could still recognize him. His eyes shone with a scarlet blood light as though he wanted to devour someone. Suddenly, Su Zimo reached out with his right hand. The old man of Illusion Fiend cult's pupils constricted and he was shocked. There was no flesh on the palm and it was all scarlet bones that burned with fine flames. It gave off a terrifying aura that seemed as though it could incinerate the heavens, boil the seas and destroy all life. It seemed like the hand of a divine being that emanated a shuddering aura. Even the sealers not far away and the many cultivators watching from afar felt their hearts skip a beat, let alone the old man of Illusion Fiend cult. Some of the cultivators could not withstand the might and sprawled on the ground, silent as cicadas in the winter. Many cultivators felt an incomparable sense of inferiority in their hearts. The bloodbone palm reached out for the soft sword. Drip, drip. Before the soft sword could pierce the bloodbone palm, it melted into liquid steel and dripped onto the ground. A perfect-grade spirit weapon was destroyed just like that. The dimensional tear was right behind the old man of Illusion Fiend cult, and there was no way for him to retreat. In his vision, a burning palm approached him and grew larger. Chapter 458. Right in front of countless gazes, the flaming bloodbone palm pierced through the body of Illusion Fiend cult sealer with ease. It was like a fiery sword piercing through a thin veil. There was no pause at all. Instantly, the flames devoured the body of Illusion Fiend cult sealer. The next moment he was reduced to ashes. In less than a single breath, a living golden core turned into a pile of ashes without a corpse left after being burned by that terrifying flame. Everything within 100 kilometers of the human emperor's palace was silent. All the cultivators felt an inexplicable pressure and their chests tightened, finding it difficult to breathe. "Look!" someone in the crowd exclaimed. There was no need for that person's reminder. Everyone's gazes were fixated on the bloodbone palm the entire time. At that moment, the void around the bloodbone palm began to distort as it was burned by the flames. Cracks appeared one after another. Dark and sinister winds gusted. The laws of the ancient battlefield were triggered and dimensional tears were triggered. Pust! Everyone sucked in a breath of cold air. This meant that the flames on the palm had already reached the level of a Jin Dan. A sinister aura surged out from the dimensional tears. Amidst the sinister winds, the flames on the bloodbone palm flickered for a while before extinguishing gradually. The next moment, the gazes of many cultivators froze in shock. One after another, pitch-black dimensional tears appeared around the bloodbone palm. Even though they had already devoured it, they spat it out. It was spat out completely unscathed. The ripping force of the dimensional tears was extremely strong to begin with, and was enough to tear apart the bodies of perfected Jin Dan or even Jinying Jinjuan. However, once one was pulled away by the dimensional tears, they would have to endure the terrifying turbulence of the void. Even Jinying Jinjuan or void reversions would have their essence spirits destroyed without a corpse if they were sucked in. Legend has it that only mighty figure patriarchs could endure the turbulence of the void and traverse it freely. However, the blood-bone palm could not even be devoured by the dimensional tears. After entering and being washed by the turbulence of the void, it was still unscathed. What was that? It was definitely not a human's bone. The descendant of Divine Phoenix Island, the blood-red bone, the flames, all of these clues seem to point towards the truth. Could it be that the legend is true? The sealer of Sword Sect had a bewildered expression as though he had thought of something terrifying, causing his voice to tremble slightly. What legend? The other sealers raised their eyebrows and someone asked in a deep voice, "Do you know the origin of Divine Phoenix Island?" The Sword Sect sealer asked in return. A sealer frowned and said, "Divine Phoenix Island was originally a nameless island in the sea. There are rumors that say that in an unknown era, a rain of fire fell from the skies and the heavens collapsed. A pure-blooded divine phoenix perished, and its corpse fell onto this nameless island. After that, this isolated island was called Divine Phoenix Island." At this point, the sealer suddenly paused as though he had thought of something. His heart skipped a beat as he asked hesitantly, "You mean, that legend is way too old? It's just a story made up by some storytellers in the secular world. It can't be true, right?" Another sealer did not believe it. The Phoenix race was definitely a true divine being with strength comparable to perfected immortals. In the cultivation world, there were no exact records of the existence of divine phoenixes or divine phoenixes in Tianhuang mainland. No one had seen a pure-blooded phoenix before, and there were only a few legends left behind. Before this, if someone had told everyone present that there was a pure-blooded living being in this world with strength comparable to perfected immortals, no one would have believed them. But now the sealers present were silent. Suddenly, the sealer of Overlord Palace said, "In the ancient books of the Fiend sects, there are legends about the Phoenix race. According to legends, the Phoenix race is a strong race comparable to dragons. They control the most terrifying and powerful flames in the world, and can incinerate and refine all living beings. In the Phoenix race, males are phoenixes and females are phoenixes. Pure-blooded divine phoenixes are also known as immortal divine phoenixes. Each time they incinerate themselves and undergo nirvanic rebirth, they will become even stronger. Therefore, in Tianhuang mainland, be it the cultivation world or the secular world, there is a saying that has always been passed down. It's called Phoenix Nirvana and rebirth from flames. Those words describe the power of the divine phoenixes and divine phoenixes." Another sealer asked, "What's the difference between the two?" The sealer of Overlord Palace replied, "In the ancient books, the phoenix race will leave behind an item each time they undergo nirvanic rebirth. An immortal divine phoenix will leave behind a drop of divine phoenix essence blood, while an immortal divine phoenix will leave behind a divine phoenix bone." When they heard that, everyone's heart skipped a beat. When they connected the fact that the lad came from Divine Phoenix Island and the terrifying flames burning on his blood-red bone palm, the truth was obvious. "You're saying that the lad's right hand is actually a divine phoenix bone?" One of the sealers exclaimed in shock. If that speculation was true, the divine phoenix bone would be one of the top treasures of Tianhuang mainland, and perhaps even the entire cultivation world. It was irreplaceable. If that was the case, it would naturally explain why the dimensional tears could not devour the bone, and why the chaotic currents of the void could not destroy it. It was not an exaggeration to call the divine phoenix bone an immortal item. Even mighty figures or patriarchs would be tempted if they saw it. Swoosh, swoosh, swoosh. Many sealers had a tacit understanding and fixed their gazes on Su Zimo's right hand at the same time. The greed in their eyes could not be concealed. All of them were perfected Jin Dan who were nearing the end of their lifespans and were already in their twilight years. The reason why they followed the successor of their sect into the ancient battlefield was partly to protect him and serve as a form of deterrence. At the same time, everyone wanted to search for some opportunities and ancient treasures to extend their lifespans, so that they could continue cultivating and break through to the nascent soul realm. After all, the divine phoenix bone was something left behind by the undying divine phoenix, after its nirvana, and possessed unfathomable divine power. Once they obtained it, they might be able to extend their lifespans. Although Su Zimo managed to kill the sealer of illusion fiend cult with his bloodbone palm, his injuries had yet to heal and his life force was still draining away with little left. It was the same for Demoness G. In the eyes of everyone, Su Zimo and Demoness Ji were already dead. What they had to consider was how to obtain the divine phoenix bone amidst the chaos after severing Su Zimo's wrist. Suddenly, a beam of light shone from the entrance of the human emperor's palace and landed on Su Zimo's body. A strong suction force pulled Su Zimo up slowly. "Go on. If you can survive, I hope you still remember me." Demoness Ji tilted her head and laid in Su Zimo's embrace like a weak young girl. Her eyes were filled with sorrow and reluctance, but she pretended to smile casually. Chapter 459. Su Zimo did not say anything, but he did not let go. Since ancient times, the human emperor's palace would only choose a single successor. Right now, as long as Su Zimo let go of Demoness Ji, he would be able to enter the human emperor's palace. However, he knew that as long as he let go, Demoness Ji would no longer have any hope of survival. Su Zimo did not want to care about the relationship between Demoness Ji and Yao Shui, nor did he want to think about the tripod. He only knew that if Demoness Ji had not tried her best to stall for time just now, he would have been killed by Formless Monastery's old monk and illusion fiend cult sealer, and would not have lasted till now. Su Zimo hugged Demoness Ji stubbornly and refused to let go. In the eyes of many cultivators, that choice was foolish and foolish. Because of this, when the two of them were halfway up, they stopped in midair, neither going up nor down. It was an unchangeable rule that the human emperor's palace would only choose a single successor. Right now, Su Zimo's choice was completely challenging the rules of the human emperor's palace and challenging the dignity of the human emperor. The few sealers were delighted when they saw that. If Su Zimo managed to enter the human emperor's palace successfully, they would lose the chance to obtain the divine phoenix bone completely. How foolish! He doesn't know what's good for him. A cultivator sneered. Another cultivator shook his head and sighed. To think that Mad Blade would be a man who values relationships. That's right. Not everyone has the courage to make such a decision. As long as they entered the human emperor's palace, not only would they have a chance to survive, they might even obtain the human emperor's inheritance. Who could resist that temptation? Snowdrift Valley's Ling Han looked at everything with a conflicted expression and bit her red lips gently. What did that choice mean? It meant that at this moment, that man was willing to sacrifice his life and the human emperor's inheritance to save Demoness Ji. Even if there was only a sliver of hope. As a woman, she was actually envious of Demoness Ji deep down. Let go. Demoness Ji frowned and her eyelids were heavy. She could no longer see Su Zimo's face clearly, and there was a hint of anxiousness in her weak voice. Don't feel guilty. I saved you because you saved me. If it wasn't for you, I would have been killed by that stinky monk. This can be considered as paying you back with your life. There was no response. You let go. There was still silence. However, Demoness Ji could feel that the person beside her hugged her even tighter. The man and woman hovered in midair, locked in a stalemate with the human emperor palace. As for the remaining sealers, they had already charged forward. Su Zimo and Li Wuyo were already at the end of their rope and had no strength to resist. The sealers did not need to use their Jin Dan realm cultivation. They only needed to use their foundation establishment realm strength to kill the two of them. Die. The first to arrive was the sword sex sealer. Buzz. The sound of the sword rang out, and a dazzling sword light flashed. It did not stab towards Su Zimo's vital points, but instead slashed towards his wrist. Su Zimo stared at the sword motionlessly. Given his current state, any Qi refinement warrior could kill him with ease, let alone a sealer of sword sect. Swash! The sword light entered the light pillar at the entrance of the human emperor's palace and created ripples before vanishing instantly. Su Zimo was safe and sound. The sealers were shocked when they saw that. All of a sudden, as though it was triggered by something, the light pillar shone brightly in a bedazzling manner. Countless beams of light burst forth and pierced through the body of the sword sex sealer instantly. Poof! 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 Blood spewed out continuously. The body of the sword sex sealer was riddled with holes by the invisible beams of light. The next moment, he exploded into a blood mist without a corpse. When they saw that, The remaining sealers were shocked and scared out of their wits. Among them, the Heavenly Dipper sex sealer had already released his secret skill and struck the light pillar. The light pillar vibrated and burst forth with a brilliant light once more, enveloping the Heavenly Dipper sex sealer like a sword and spear. That person was impressive as well. With a resolute look in his eyes, he roared and released his Jin Dan realm strength, wanting to fight against the beam of light before him. Bang! The Heavenly Dipper sex sealer turned into a blood mist and died on the spot. Even though it was just an invisible beam of light that descended from the human emperor's palace, it was enough to suppress everything, and anyone who touched it would definitely die. Everyone stopped and fled hurriedly, not daring to linger for a single moment. It was only after the sealers escaped from the range of the human emperor's palace that they dared to stop in their tracks and turn back with lingering fear. Within the gigantic beam of light, the man and woman were still hovering in midair, hugging each other without separating. The sealers had grim expressions and were indignant. The current situation had severed all chances of them obtaining the divine phoenix bone. Let's wait a little longer. There's still a chance. A moment later, Hollow Monastery's old monk calmed himself down and said slowly with a flickering gaze. That's right, the sealer of Overlord Palace said darkly, a mere Foundation establishment cultivator who wants to challenge the rules of the human emperor's palace will definitely fail. If this drags on, the result of this pair of man and woman will be death. The sealers nodded silently. If the two of them died, the human emperor's palace would either disappear or choose a new successor. Regardless of the situation, the successor of Divine Phoenix Island would lose the protection of the human emperor's palace. That way, they would have a chance to sever that lad's wrist and obtain the divine phoenix bone. Right now, all the sealers had to do was wait patiently. Demoness G collapsed in Su Zimo's embrace motionlessly, and no one knew if she was dead or alive. Su Zimo's aura was getting weaker as well. Su Zimo raised his head and looked at the dark entrance of the human emperor's palace. Gradually, he narrowed his eyes with a resolute gaze, as though he would never yield or retreat. A long time later, just as Su Zimo's consciousness was gradually fading, a change happened in midair. As though they were guided by some sort of power, the two of them began to rise slowly. In the blink of an eye, the two of them entered the human emperor's palace and vanished. There was a dead silence. Everyone was dumbfounded when they saw that and even forgot to breathe. How is that possible? A long time later, Hollow Monastery's old monk murmured to himself with widened eyes and a lost expression. The human emperor's palace has compromised? The sealer of Overlord Palace smiled bitterly, seemingly laughing and crying at the same time. If the human emperor's palace had a spirit, it would definitely contain the will of the human emperor. Throughout history, the human emperor was the strongest emperor and there was no other. The human emperor's palace represented the human emperor. How could it lower its head and compromise? Furthermore, this was against a mere Foundation establishment cultivator. If they had not witnessed it personally, none of them would have believed what was happening. The entrance of the human emperor's palace closed. Rumble. Boom. The gigantic ancient palace quaked and dust fell as it rose into the air slowly, vanishing into the horizon. The dark clouds dispersed and the sea of lightning dried up as warm sunlight shone down. Above their heads the skies were clear. However, many of the sealers felt gloomy. You're tuning into the Li Mei's Wuxia Whispers YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.